Chapter 97. Two disciples stood on the stone pillars, separated by more than 100 feet. The younger one came from Bihu Peak and was in the upper state of inherited will. The middle-aged disciple came from Tianguang Peak and was the second disciple of Elder Mo. He had already broken through the state of undefeated. The gap between states was hard to make up. 3 years ago, Jing Jiu defeated Gu Qing in the stream of sword washing, which was a rare occurrence. The flying sword of a disciple in the state of inherited will could move freely within 100 feet, but the killing range of a disciple in the state of undefeated was several times that. Logically speaking, the disciple of Bihu Peak had no chance of winning, but how could he admit defeat? A bright sword light crossed the distance of more than 100 feet and arrived in front of him. Unable to fight back, the disciple of Bihu Peak could only ride his sword to avoid the danger. His sword source spun rapidly and flew forward as fast as he could. He had to shorten the distance between him and his opponent in order to exert the power of his flying sword. The bright sword light turned back and chopped down again. The disciple of Bihu Peak rode his sword into the clouds below the stone forest and once again narrowly avoided this attack. The bright sword light brushed past the stone pillars, bringing up stone chips like a light rain. Seeing this scene, there was a burst of exclamations below the stone forest. People appreciated the courage of the disciple of Bihu Peak, but they were also worried about his safety. It was very dangerous to ride a sword through the clouds and mist, and one could crash into a stone pillar at any time. "Here it comes!" Someone suddenly shouted. Somewhere in the clouds and mist suddenly bulged. The disciple of Bihu Peak rode his sword and was only about 100 feet away from his senior brother of Tianguang Peak. He was surrounded by clouds and mist, and there was a faint flash of lightning. He was already prepared in the clouds, condensing all the sword energy in his body for this final strike. Seeing this scene, the disciple of Tianguang Peak showed a trace of appreciation in his eyes. He was not nervous at all. He put his 2 fingers together and used the sword formula again. The bright sword light suddenly appeared above the clouds and mist, as if it had been waiting there. The disciple of Bihu Peak had no time to react. He forcibly turned his sword and crashed into a stone pillar. A muffled sound rang out. The stone pillar stood there unmoving. That disciple's face was covered in blood, unconscious as he fell towards the ground. Before his master could come to his rescue, a disciple of Tianguang Peak stepped on his sword and caught him before he fell into the clouds. There was a burst of cheers from the peak. The first round of the sword trial had already entered the middle stage. In the sword trial that had ended, the disciples of Tianguang Peak and Bihu Peak had the best performances. Similar to the previous years, Yunqing Peak had a good record as well, but Shilai Peak and Shuriwa Peak weren't good at sword fights, so the disciples of the 2 peaks had only won 3 matches in total. Surprisingly, Qingrong Peak had a terrible performance this year. All 7 female disciples they sent had lost. The masters of Shuriwa Peak were there to treat those disciples who had lost. Though those disciples were a bit disappointed, they didn't show much negative emotion on their faces. The disciples who won didn't show any arrogance. After all, it was a competition between disciples of the same sect. Besides, except for Yao Song's Han, the other disciples of Liangwang Peak hadn't shown up yet. Next, a tall figure walked into the field, causing some discussions. This tall disciple was Jian Russian, ranked 46th on Liangwang Peak. He was more famous because he was Jian Ruyun's younger brother. Jian Ruyun, ranked 4th on Liangwang Peak, was undoubtedly a swordsman among the disciples of the 3rd generation. He had a high level of sword work and was respected by his peers. 2 years ago, when Lu Shisui was sent back to Aoyama in a coma by the muddy river, Jian Ruyun, the leader of the team, was punished by Shangda Peak and imprisoned in the stone room for half a year for his incompetence. Many people thought it was unreasonable at the time. After Lu Shisui woke up, he was suspected of having eaten the Dace Devil pill. The disciples felt that Jian Ruyun had been wronged and felt indignant for him. Jian Russian's cultivation state was not as good as his elder brother's, but he had a place on Liangwang Peak, so he couldn't be underestimated. Many disciples were wondering who had such bad luck to draw the 2nd disciple of Liangwang Peak. Jian Russian suddenly said, I want to name a name. Hearing this, the disciples were a bit surprised. The sword trial in Aoyama was carried out according to the order of drawing lots. But there was an exception, which was the challenge by name. Since it was a challenge by name, no one dared to choose a peer who was weaker than him. So he would only choose an opponent whose cultivation state was generally higher than him. Who was Jian Russian going to challenge by name? People noticed that he had fixed his eyes on the 9 stone platforms on the cliffs, wondering if he was going to challenge a senior brother of the same peak. Those sitting on the stone platforms were all masters of the peaks, and only the disciples of Liangwang Peak could be chosen. Looking at the farthest stone platform, Jian Russian said expressionlessly, I want a name. Senior Uncle Jingjio. The crowd was in an uproar. Jian Russian paused for a long time between the words Jingjio and Senior Uncle on purpose, and everyone could sense his hostility. Many disciples remembered the rumor that Jingjio and Lu Shui used to be a master and a servant. Did Jian Russian want to avenge his elder brother? Countless eyes fell on Jingjio. Jingjio didn't respond, still looking at the mountain path in the distance. Jian Russian sneered and said, What? Senior Uncle Jing doesn't dare to accept the challenge? Qi Yin walked out and said in a deep voice, Do you want to offend your superior? As an elder of Shangda Peak, he had the right to veto the challenge by name according to the sect rules. But the disciples were not convinced. No one knew the real cultivation state of Jingjio, but he was recognized as a genius in swordsmanship, and more importantly, he was the senior uncle. Therefore, there was no problem for Jian Russian to challenge him. Jingjio still didn't pay attention to him, looking at the mountain path in the distance. Being ignored, Jian Russian was very angry, thinking that Yi Qingyu was trying to get away with it. Feeling even more shameless, he said, He was interrupted before he finished his words. A weird sound came from the mountain path in the distance. The sound was very harsh, like 2 swords colliding and rubbing against each other. The disciples looked in the direction of the sound. A figure appeared on the mountain path. That person was very thin, and his sword robe was shabby, fluttering in the wind. As he walked, the disciples saw his face clearly. That person's face was pale, his eyes were deep, and his hair was like weeds. The strange thing was that there were no shackles on his feet, but when he walked, there would be a sound of metal rubbing between the soles of his shoes and the blue stone. There was a burst of exclamations around the stone forest. Lu Shui, why is he here? It had been 2 years. He had been in the stone room behind the cliff of Qinguang Peak and had never come out. The natural Taoist quality was gradually forgotten. But today, he suddenly appeared in front of everyone. He was like a ghost. Zhao Lei's expression turned slightly serious. The expressions of the elders changed slightly. They heard one thing from that sound. There was a sword sound when he walked. That was the sign of the body of sword will. Zhao Lei had practiced hard in Sword Peak for many years before she succeeded in practicing the body of sword will. How did Lu Shui do it when he was imprisoned in the stone room on Qinguang Peak? Zhao Lei looked at Jingjio, wanting to know his reaction and to get an answer. But Jingjio was concerned about something else. He murmured, How can that little black face be so pale? How many days has it been since he went out in the sun? Hello, students. I would like to recommend a new book to everyone. The book is called The Great Path Toward Heaven. Oh no, it's Demon Ye Wushuang. Please support me, everyone. Chapter 98. Under the shocked gazes of the crowd, Lu Shui came to the field. He lowered his head, and his weedy hair covered his eyes, looking like a criminal. What are you doing here? Elder Bai Rujing scolded him sternly, his expression terrible. As an elder in the broken sea state of Qinguang Peak, he had taught a wicked disciple who ate the devil pill. It was the most humiliating thing he had ever experienced in his life. Lu Shui said hoarsely without raising his head, This disciple wants to take part in the sword trial. The expression on Bai Rujing's face grew even colder as he yelled, What qualification do you have to take part in the sword trial? Get out of here right now. Master, I'm also a disciple of Aoyama. Why can't I take part in the sword trial? Lu Shui's head was still lowered, and his voice was still as hoarse. Seeing his current appearance and hearing his voice, many disciples felt sympathetic for him. The female disciples on Qingrong Peak felt even more sentimental. Jin Ruishan said to Lu Shisui with a sneer, "You ate the devil pill secretly back then, which caused my elder brother to be imprisoned, and you have committed other serious crimes. If the masters hadn't found the evidence, your cultivation would have been abolished, and you would have been expelled from the mountain gate a long time ago. But you still have the nerve to come out and ask why." Lu Shisui didn't respond to him, waiting for Bai Rujing's answer. Jin Russian suddenly laughed and said mockingly, "Since you want to take part in the sword trial, and I happen to be here, why don't we have a match?" Having said that, he called out his flying sword. It was a flying sword made of black gold, about 2.5 feet long, making a buzzing sound and vibrating at a speed that couldn't be seen clearly by the naked eye. Lu Shisui suddenly waved his hand. His shabby sleeve created a series of residual shadows. A violent wind sprang up. A few green lights shot out from his sleeve, heading toward Jin Russian. A crisp sword chime could be heard. The black gold sword flew away diagonally. Pa, 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 pa. Jin Russian was knocked back 100 feet and hit the cliff wall, spitting out a mouthful of fresh blood, unable to stand up again. A few visible cracks appeared on his body. The sword force. The separation sword. There was a burst of surprise screams. Some of the teachers stood up in shock. Even an important figure, like the peak master of Qingrong, had a grave expression on his face. Be it the astral sword or the parting sword, they were both extremely difficult to cultivate because there was a prerequisite. Yes, Lu Shisui's tempered body of sword intent wasn't at the beginner level, but it had already reached the mastery level. Nobody came to the quiet stone house on Tianguang Peak to explore, and there weren't as many swift and fierce sword wills as on Yunxing Peak. But in his heart, there was a wildfire called unwillingness. That wildfire burned for 2 whole years, making him unable to sleep at night. "How dare you launch a sneak attack?" Bai Rujing was furious to the extreme, and he shouted, "I'll cripple you today." A melodramatic drama of master and disciple killing each other was about to unfold, but someone stopped it. "Elder Bai, please wait," Qi Yin said expressionlessly. "I saw it very clearly. It was Jin Russian who challenged him, and it was Jin Russian who attacked first. How could you say that Lu Shisui launched a sneak attack?" According to the rules of the sword trial in Aoyama, once either side summoned their flying swords, it meant that the competition could begin. Qi Yin was an elder of Shangda Peak, so his explanation of the sect rules couldn't be wrong. But the question was, why did he speak up for Lu Shisui? It took the disciples a while to figure it out. It must have something to do with the dispute between the 2 peaks. The people of Shanghai Peak should be the happiest when Tianguang Peak had such a sinful disciple as Lu Shisui. In Aoyama, the relationship between Tianguang Peak and Shanghai Peak had always been complicated. Everyone knew the reason, but no one dared to say it. The peak heads and elders on the stone platform all remained silent, and the disciples didn't dare to make sound. "You're right. As long as you're not expelled from the mountain gate, you're a disciple of Aoyama, and you're qualified to participate in the sword trial." Qi Yin looked at Lu Shisui and said expressionlessly, "But you should know that the drawing of lots has been over for a long time." Lu Shisui said with his head lowered, "I'd like to name a name. Since Jin Ruishan could name a person, so could he." After a moment of silence, Qi Yin asked, "Who do you want to name?" Lu Shisui lifted his head and looked at a spot in the cliff. His eyes were bright, which couldn't be concealed by his messy hair that looked like weeds. "Jin Ruoyun, big brother." An uproar broke out again. The disciples around the stone forest were stunned. 2 years ago, it was because Lu Shisui ate the devil pill secretly and fell into a coma that Jin Ruoyun was implicated and locked up in the stone room for half a year. Now, Lu Shisui didn't think about his own mistakes and wanted to challenge Jin Ruoyun. It was ridiculous. Did he think it was Jin Ruoyun's fault that he had ended up like this? As the sword light flickered, Jin Ruoyun came to the scene. He looked at Lu Shisui and said sentimentally, "Young brother Lu, why did you do this? Do you think it's my fault?" It's true that I underestimated you and let you make a big mistake, but it was you who made the mistake. Lu Shui snapped angrily. Did I? Was I really the one who made the mistake? The expression on Jian Ruyun's face changed slightly. Lu Shui stared into his eyes and said, You know what had happened the best, but you've never told me that it was obviously. It's useless to say more. Now that you think it's my fault, come at me. But I have to tell you that you're no match for me, even if you ate the devil pill. Jian Ruyun suddenly interrupted him. For some reason, his face was a bit pale. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui said, Yeah, I've said this many times in the last 2 years, but nobody believes me. So, there's no point in saying it again. Having said that, he stepped onto his sword and landed on a stone pillar in the west without saying anything. Jian Ruyun raised his eyebrows slightly, but didn't say anything. He rode his sword and landed on a stone pillar in the east. The distance between the 2 stone pillars was more than 1,000 feet. Jian Ruyun ranked 4th on Liangwang Peak, and his sword work was profound. It was said that he had made a breakthrough in the upper state of the undefeated after being confined in the stone room for half a year. If he had a few more years, he might have reached the threshold of the free travel state. Who among the disciples of the 3rd generation could be his match except for Guananshan and Zhuo Ruzhui, who was still behind closed doors on Tiangwang Peak? It was deathly quiet around the stone forest. Nobody thought that Lu Shui had any chance, even though he had accomplished the tempered will of the sword and formed the chaotic sword on his own. In the next moment, the silence was broken. Surprise cries could be heard everywhere in the peaks, especially on the stone platforms where the masters of the 9 peaks stood. It was because Lu Shui had drawn his sword. It wasn't because his sword was terrifying. On the contrary, it was very quiet. It was strange to use the word quiet to describe a flying sword. Lu Shui's sword flew forward. It was very slow. It seemed to be carrying a lot of weight. It was as heavy as the sky. The expression on Bai Rujing's face changed slightly. It was he who taught it to Lu Shui. The problem was that he had taught Lu Shui for only half a year, but he didn't expect Lu Shui to have mastered the essence of the inherited heaven sword style. Chapter 99. Countless gazes were fixed on the top of the stone forest. Standing on the stone post, Lu Shui looked like a wild ghost, his clothes shabby and his hair short like grass. Yet his sword was so calm and peaceful. He was like the king of the 3rd generation, the pillar general of the state, or a scholar with white hair. Jian Ruyun hadn't drawn his sword yet. He looked at Lu Shui's sword in silence. Like him, many people were waiting for Lu Shui's sword to fly over the stone post in the middle. By then, he would be qualified to ask Jian Ruyun to draw his sword. Time passed. Lu Shui's sword flew over the stone post. It happened to be in the middle of the 2 stone posts where he and Jian Ruyun stood. His sword wills hadn't dispersed after flying over 1,000 feet and were extremely pure. There were no screams because the crowd was shocked speechless. This seemingly meaningless scene revealed a shocking truth in Aoyama. Lu Shui had already entered the undefeated state. Amazing, said Zhao Leu. Regardless of the hidden reason, Lu Shui had been imprisoned for the past 2 years, but he had broken through the undefeated state, so he deserved such praise. How old is he? Asked the peak master of Qingrong. A disciple replied uncertainly, 17 or 18. The peak master of Qingrong glanced at Zhao Leu, not far away, saying nothing. The masters of the 9 peaks were all shocked. After the immortal Jingyang, the youngest swordsmen in the undefeated state in Aoyama were Zhao Leu and Zhuo Ruzhui, and Lu Shui ranked 3rd. If he had been able to cultivate normally in the past 2 years, would he have advanced faster? If he hadn't done such a thing, and if he hadn't been involved in another murder case, how could Aoyama treat such a genius like him so? Some masters even thought it would be better if what Lu Shui had said was true. A gust of wind blew from the other side of the cliff. It didn't have the warmth of late spring. The wind landed on Lu Shui's sword. The sword trembled slightly and suddenly emitted 4 rays of clear light. The 4 beams of clear light were not illusions, but real existences. They were the sword intent. The flying sword sped up all of a sudden, heading toward Jianren, who was 1,000 feet away, along with 4 beams of sword energy. Lu Shui finally made his move, and he used his strongest move. Looking at the bright sword light and the 4 sword energies, Jianren waved his sleeve slightly, his expression unchanged. A gray flying sword pierced through the air and instantly appeared in front of Lu Shui's sword. Being as fast as lightning was just a description. Jianren's sword was like a flash of lightning, too fast to be seen clearly. Lu Shui's sword, which had been accumulating power for a long time, was blocked before it could reveal its sharpness. The 2 flying swords met in the air above the stone forest. A sword chime resounded throughout the valley. The 2 flying swords separated and met again. Then there were countless reunions. In the blink of an eye, the 2 swords had collided countless times in the sky. The crisp sword chimes rang out incessantly, like a rainstorm. Innumerable sparks splashed up like a silver tree blooming in front of the peak, illuminating the stone forest. Even the sun in the sky dimmed a little. The 2 flying swords were fighting in the sky. Lu Shui and Jianren stood on their respective stone pillars, their hands clasped behind their backs, looking at each other calmly from a distance of 3,000 feet. After a long while, the bright gray sword light abruptly vanished. The 2 flying swords returned to the front of Lu Shui and Jianren respectively. The disciples of Aoyama at the foot of the stone forest were stunned. It was obvious that Big Brother Jianren's sword work was much more profound than Lu Shui's. But why did the 2 of them end up in a tie? The 2 flying swords quivered slightly, with hundreds of tiny cracks appearing on their bodies. It seemed that the materials of the 2 swords were similar. Jianren glanced at his own sword. Yet, Lu Shui took a step forward without even looking at it. Only one person could stand on the stone pillar. His step landed in the air. The flying sword had been waiting there for a long time. The stone platform where the disciples of Liangwang Peak stood was quiet from the beginning to the end. Jian Rushan challenged Jing Jiu by name, was severely wounded by Lu Shui with the sword intent, and Lu Shui challenged Jianren by name. Guanan Shan, Gu Han, and Ma Hua remained absolutely silent. Looking at the scene in the sky above the stone forest, Gu Han recalled the time when Lu Shui took a step toward the sky on the sword peak. He felt both gratified and apologetic. The 2 sword lights illuminated the stone forest again. The fight between Lu Shui and Jianren on their swords was much more dangerous than before. The 2 sword lights sometimes fell into the clouds, and sometimes flew up into the sky. At the highest point, they were almost at the top of Tianguang Peak. The clouds were stirred up like boiling water. Sword marks appeared on the cliff walls, and the stone chips fell off the stone pillars from time to time. The 2 sword lights moved so fast that ordinary disciples couldn't see them clearly. Only the disciples with higher cultivation states and the masters of the 9 peaks knew how fierce and dangerous this sword fight was. Swoosh! Swoosh! The 2 sword lights separated again. The 2 landed on their respective stone pillars. A trickle of blood seeped out from the corner of Lu Shui's mouth. There was a tear on Jianren's sleeve. Fighting with a sword was never a simple matter of riding the sword. The reason for riding the sword away from the stone pillars was to change the direction of the sword, in case the opponent's flying sword got rid of the entanglement of his own sword and suddenly attacked him. In this way, he could better defend himself. However, since he had to ride on the sword, the attack of the flying sword would be much weaker. Normally, in such a fight, Lu Shui should have the upper hand. He had already cultivated the sword intent, so he could still attack his opponent in the sky, even if he was riding on the sword. However, he didn't expect Jianren to be so good at riding the sword that he could avoid his sword intent at the most critical moment and crush him with his sword momentum. Why do so few disciples of our sect cultivate the sword intent? It's because it's an unorthodox method. Standing on the stone pillar and looking at Lu Shui a few thousand feet away, Jianren said, "It seems that the power of the devil pill can only help you so much. A gust of wind rose up, rolling up the clouds and fog under the stone forest and ruffling his green robe. A powerful energy was emitted from his body. The flying sword sensed it and passed through the clouds, leaving a wisp of white smoke behind. Someone cried out in surprise. The seventh move of the old bird sword style. Borrowing Cloud. Jian Riyun had been a disciple of Yunqing Peak before he joined Liangwang Peak, and he was the personal disciple of the Peak Master. The main sword of Yunqing Peak was called Absolute Emptiness, and the sword manual was called the Old Bird. There were 13 moves in all. If a disciple in the undefeated state could learn the fifth move, he would be regarded as a talented person. Jian Riyun had learned the seventh move, Borrowing Cloud. It was said that he had made a breakthrough 2 years ago when he was confined in the stone room on the Shangda Peak for half a year. It seemed that he had mastered the true meaning of the old bird sword style. Looking at the faintly visible flying sword passing through the clouds and fog, his colleagues were full of admiration. The disciples of Yunqing Peak cheered loudly, and the elders nodded in agreement. Seeing the flying sword approaching with the clouds, the expression on Lu Shisui's face changed slightly, and he wielded his sword again. Jing Jiao had said that his eyebrows were too straight, but his sword was actually straighter. The bright flying sword illuminated the stone forest as it flew forward in a straight line. When the two flying swords were about to meet, a loud buzzing sound suddenly burst out in the stone forest. The white clouds and fog rose up with great momentum, flowing in all directions like a vast ocean, immediately engulfing the two swords. Lu Shisui sensed that the connection between him and the flying sword had suddenly weakened. All of a sudden, Jian Riyun's sword reappeared, and it arrived in front of Lu Shisui. This gray sword seemed to be able to ignore the distance and the space. A burst of surprise screams burst out in the stone forest. One could peep into the Tao of heaven and earth by means of the changes in the clouds and fog. Jian Riyun had proved that he was qualified to enjoy the sceneries of the state of free travel. The gray sword pierced straight into Lu Shisui's face, seemingly without any intention of stopping. Everybody thought that Jian Riyun would withdraw his sword in the end, so they weren't worried. Lu Shisui was the only one who could sense Jian Riyun's lethal intent. Chapter 100. Many people thought they heard the howl of a wounded wild beast, but they didn't know where the sound came from. It was quiet in the forest between the peaks and the cliff behind the clouds. The sound seemed to be ringing in their minds. Jian Riyun heard the howl as well. He knew where the sound came from, even though Lu Shisui didn't open his mouth. He could see the anger on Lu Shisui's face and the determination in his eyes from a distance of 1,000 feet. That resolute expression quickly transformed into a faint flame that was incomparably bright red and extremely strange. Lu Shisui's body exuded a powerful and wild energy. At this moment, he seemed to have turned into a primeval demon. The air around Lu Shisui began to circulate at high speed. It was extremely hot around him, as if countless invisible flames were spurting out. Along with a sizzling sound, the clouds and fog that came with the flying sword were burned to ashes before they could even touch his body. Jian Riyun's flying sword sensed the danger and was about to fly away, but it was trapped by an invisible force, vibrating and making shrill whistling sounds. It struggled with all its might, but it couldn't leave. It hovered in the air in front of the stone pillar, like a moth trapped in a spider's web. "The demonic fire!" someone shouted in surprise. The teachers of the Shanghai Peak who were in charge of maintaining the order of the sword trial grew solemn. They were ready to ride their swords and open the formation around the stone forest at any moment. Boom! The stone pillar under Lu Shisui's feet couldn't stand the high temperature and the sword wheels anymore, sputtering countless rocks and dust. The rocks and dust rolled forward, dispersing the clouds and fog that came with Jian Riyun's flying sword, as if countless mountain peaks had fallen into the sea. Jian Riyun swallowed the blood that was gushing up his throat and used all his sword source to forcefully call back the flying sword trapped by the invisible flame. As the sword light flickered, he had already landed on the sword. The sword broke through the wind and arrived in front of Lu Shui. He was ready to ride his sword to kill him again. At this critical moment, he met Lu Shui's eyes through the invisible flame. He saw Lu Shui's eyes clearly. That pair of eyes that were once clear and without impurities were now only bright. That was because there was a true wildfire in the depths of those eyes. The wild and untamable flame seemed faint, but gave people a feeling that it would never change. It was extremely strange. Jian Riyun had seen such a pair of eyes before. 2 years ago, on that night in a muddy river, he and Lu Shui took the risk to dive to the bottom of the river to hunt down the seriously injured Dace Devil. The Dace Devil glanced at him before it died. He remembered very clearly that it was this pair of eyes, this kind of wildfire. Jian Riyun was slightly startled, a hint of remorse showing in his eyes. He yelled loudly and was about to ride his sword to flee. It was too late, just like that night. Suddenly, he stopped moving. His eyes became a little confused, as if he didn't know why he was here. The flying sword let out a clear ring, and he woke up again. Everything happened in an instant. In a battle between flying swords, it was all about a split second. A bright sword light pierced through his chest. Blood splattered everywhere. Jian Riyun fell down from the sword toward the ground. The expression on Lu Shui's face was indifferent, and he didn't intend to spare his opponent's life. The bright sword light suddenly turned around and slashed toward Jian Riyun's neck. Jian Riyun didn't have the strength to fight back. His head and body were about to be cut in half. Screams broke out around the stone forest. It was then that a bright sword light broke through the protective formation of the stone forest like a rainbow and arrived in front of Jian Riyun. Crack! Several clear sounds rang out. The bright sword light wrapped up Lu Shui's sword and pulled it to a high altitude far away from the stone forest, and then it was shredded into pieces. That sword rider had a powerful cultivation in sword work. The disciples of Aoyama thought it must be a senior master in the state of free travel who had helped Jian Riyun, so they felt relieved. Lu Shui spat out a mouthful of blood after his flying sword was destroyed. Unexpectedly, he didn't want to let it go. He jumped down from the shaking stone post and chased after Jian Riyun like a rock, as if he had gone mad. A figure left the cliff and leaped into the air. He arrived in front of Lu Shui and hit his chest with his palm. Pa! Pa! Countless sounds rang out. In a very short time, Lu Shui's body had suffered dozens of heavy blows. That person's strike was very clean and simple, but Lu Shui had no way to dodge it. He kept spitting out blood, creating a bloody rain in the sky. In the end, he fell to the ground miserably with a loud thud. That person landed by his side. He waved his sleeves lightly, creating a few air currents, and slowly caught Jian Riyun. The disciples of Shuriwei Peak hurried over and started treating Jian Riyun. The clouds and fog had dispersed, and the smoke and dust had settled down. The bright sword light turned around in the sky and hovered quietly in front of that person. This flying sword was blue, like the ocean, illuminated by the sword light. That person's clothing seemed to be blue as well. The expression on that person's face was as nonchalant as usual, but a hint of pity could be seen in his eyes. It wasn't until now that the disciples saw clearly that it wasn't one of the senior masters who struck Jian Riyun, but Guannan Shan. Guannan Shan was the principal disciple of the sect master and the principal disciple of Liangwang Peak, loved and respected by his colleagues. But his cultivation state wasn't that impressive, at least not as famous as Zhuoruzhui. Unexpectedly, he was already a swordsman in the free travel state. Zhao Liu had been watching Jingjiu with the corner of her eye. The expression on Jingjiu's face hadn't changed, as if he wasn't interested in what was happening in the stone forest. She knew it wasn't true. It was because she was certain that when Guannan Shan struck in person and beat Lu Shui until he vomited blood and fell to the ground, Jingjiu had made a move. The regular people couldn't even tell that Jingjiu had made a move. If Zhao Liu hadn't been observing him carefully, she wouldn't have noticed it either. At that moment, the expression on Jingjiu's face didn't change, as he moved the index finger of his right hand slightly. "You have indeed eaten the Dace Devil's devil pill." Looking at Lu Shui, Guinanshan said regretfully and disappointedly, "And you have even learned the deviant methods of the bloody demon church." Countless angry gazes fell on Lu Shui as he said this. Though there was no evidence that Lu Shui had eaten the devil pill, it had been tacitly accepted by the people of Aoyama. But the Bloody Demon Church? Many years ago, there was a deviant sect called the Bloody Demon Church in Chaotian. The magic methods they practiced were very evil, causing harm to countless people. After being attacked by the Orthodox sects, the Bloody Demon Church even colluded with the underworld secretly, committing all kinds of evil deeds. Later, the Bloody Demon Church was finally wiped out by the swordsmen of Aoyama's sect, Zhongzhou School, No Mercy sect, Ozawa, and the royal family. At that time, the Windy Broadsword Church and the Western Sea Sword School hadn't appeared yet. It was rumored in the cultivation circle that the Bloody Demon Church had left many secret deviant methods. Unexpectedly, the rumor was true. However, Lu Shui had stayed on the 9 peaks of Aoyama the entire time. Where did he get this deviant method? Chapter 101. Lu Shui sat on the ground with his back against the stone post, his body covered in blood. Though he was stared at by countless angry gazes, he didn't care at all. So what? As long as I can kill him, I'm willing to do anything. Guinanshan looked at Jian Ryun, who was being resuscitated, and said, "You wouldn't have been able to hurt him today if he hadn't suspected you of learning the deviant method." Of course he wouldn't suspect me, because he knows I'm not that kind of person. Lu Shui turned his head with difficulty and looked at the unconscious Jian Ryun, saying he was the one who wanted to eat the devil pill back then. Guinanshan shook his head, saying, "It's already come to this. Why do you still want to ruin his reputation?" Lu Shui said, 2 years ago, I discovered that he wanted to steal the devil pill at the bottom of the muddy river. I tried to stop him, but he sneak attacked me. This is the truth. Why would I ruin his reputation?" Guinanshan looked at Qi Yan. Over the last 2 years, the Shanghai Peak had been in charge of the interrogation of Lu Shui. The other disciples of Aoyama had no idea what had happened. Qi Yan said expressionlessly, "You don't need to know the truth. We won't believe you." Lu Shui continued nonchalantly, 2 years ago, you tortured me. I didn't say a word no matter how painful it was, because I knew you wouldn't believe me. Last year, you came to interrogate me again. I finally started to talk, but you still didn't believe me. Now that you've decided that I'm the bad one, why do you still ask me?" Qi Yan said calmly, "Because what happened today has proved that you did eat the devil pill." Only Lu Shui and Jian Ryun knew what had happened at the bottom of the muddy river. There were no other witnesses, and the devil pill was the only evidence. In the last 2 years, nobody in Shanghai Peak, including Qi Yan, could find any direct evidence proving that Lu Shui had eaten the devil pill because of the secret magic imprinted in his soul. Today, the evidence finally appeared. Lu Shui suddenly laughed out loud, his mood somewhat deranged. "I want to snatch that Yao core, and the Yao core enter my body by itself. It entered by itself. What could I do?" He glanced at Guinanshan and then at Qi Yan and his fellow disciples who were looking at him with disgust. He spread out his hands and asked, "If it were you, what would you do?" When he asked this question, he was still laughing loudly, but at some point his face was already covered in tears. The dust and bloodstains were washed away, making him look like a complete mess. There was silence. If what he said was true, what would I do if I were in his shoes? The Aoyama disciples were asking themselves this question in their hearts. If they couldn't find an answer, it meant that they already had an answer. Looking at Lu Shui, whose face was covered in tears, many people sympathized with him, but they still refused to believe his words. Venomous slander. Senior brother Jian has already been harmed like this by you, and you still want to ruin his reputation. You are a shameless scoundrel. You took advantage of the fact that my big brother is unconscious and unable to speak to you to frame him in such a despicable way. The disciples of Liangwang Peak and Yunqing Peak couldn't stand it anymore, cursing loudly. By now, the treatment of Jian Riyun on Shuriwa Peak had finished. It was confirmed that Jian Riyun's injury was severe, but his life was not in danger. Hearing this, Guan Nanshan and many others felt relieved. Lu Shui felt relieved as well. He had finally vented the anger that had been holding him up until today. He had prepared for 2 years in silence, and he didn't hesitate to expose that he had eaten the Yao core in secret just to kill Jian Riyun. However, he didn't succeed in the end. Leaning against the stone post, he didn't speak anymore, his face full of despair. Qi Yin announced Lu Shui's crimes in public. In addition to eating the Yao core and practicing the deviant magic method, he also had another crime related to the death of Zui Yi of Bihu Peak. Some hot-tempered disciples of Bihu Peak spat and cursed in Lu Shui's direction. In the end, they announced the end of Lu Shui. He was sentenced to death by the sword. Jingjiu looked at the young man under the stone post in silence. Lu Shui had grown up a lot compared to when they were in the small village a few years ago. Jingjiu hadn't seen him for 3 years, so he felt his face was a bit strange. Zhao Liu shot him a glance and said, "I object." The disciples were all startled. According to the sword justice of Aoyama, it was a capital punishment to sentence a disciple to death by the sword. Even the sect master or Shanghai Peak couldn't make the decision on their own. It had to be approved by all the peak masters. If one peak master disagreed, the punishment couldn't be carried out, and the disciple had to be locked up in the sword jail, even if he would never come out again. Among the prisoners locked up in the sword jail at the bottom of Shangda Peak, some were disciples of the Aoyama sect, except for those demons and deviant followers who couldn't be killed. Qi Yin furrowed his brows slightly, asking, "May I ask why?" The authority of Shangda Peak had been challenged, but he had to respect Zhao Liu's status as the master of Shenma Peak. Jian Ruoyan didn't die. No disciple of Aoyama died, because of him from the beginning to the end. So why did he have to die? Zhao Liu went on. And didn't you hear what he said just now? Now that there's a secret, why don't we wait for Jian Riyun to wake up and ask him? What she said showed that she was suspicious of Jian Riyun and sided with Lu Shui. Upon hearing this, the disciples of Liangwang Peak and Yunqing Peak couldn't help but glare at each other angrily. "What are you looking at?" asked Zhao Liu while looking at them with a calm expression. The disciples of the 2 peaks came back to their senses, realizing that their behavior was extremely rude, so they withdrew their gazes resentfully. What else is there to ask? Everyone has eyes. The devil pill is in Lu Shui's stomach. Looking at Jian Riyun, who was still unconscious, the peak master of Yunqing shouted angrily. He was already furious. Zhao Liu remained calm, saying, "So what? I still don't agree." She meant she didn't agree. As long as she didn't agree, Lu Shui wouldn't die. It was quiet around the stone forest. Everybody knew that Lu Shui would survive. The problem was being imprisoned in the sword jail and never to see the light of day for the rest of his life better than death. Jingjiu still didn't say anything because he knew this wasn't the real ending. As expected, the distant voice of the sect master came from the peak top. This is the first time in 100 years that the 9th peak has participated in a meeting in Aoyama. Please think it over, Shanghai Peak. The 3-foot sword suddenly started vibrating, emitting a strand of extremely cold energy. Yuan Qijing's voice spread throughout the peaks, falling into the ears of the disciples like icicles, making them feel very uncomfortable. Seize his sword pill, break his meridians, purge his elixir poison, destroy his cultivation, and expel him from Aoyama. Qingguang Peak will deal with it on their own. This was Lu Shui's final ending. Everyone knew that Shanghai Peak was willing to take a step back because the sect master had spoken. The sect master's words were to give face to enlightened Jingyang's direct disciples. Then why did Zhao Liu step forward to protect Lu Shui's life? Many people had already guessed that it had something to do with Jingjiu. Many people still remembered the relationship between him and Lu Shui. A Shanghai Peak deacon helped Lu Shui up, using a sword rope to tie his arms. Lu Shui looked at Jing Jiu, who was on the cliff platform. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said loudly, "I don't need your fake mercy." Jing Jiu's expression was indifferent, and he still didn't say anything. "When I needed help the most, where were you? When I was at my worst, where were you? You left. You left Aoyama to travel. I know you purposely avoided them, but why? Was it because you were afraid of offending them? Or were you afraid of seeing me in such a miserable state?" Lu Shui said sadly, "Yes, you are the most promising swordsman in Aoyama's sect, and I am just an abandoned disciple. Moreover, there is no friendship between us. You only lived in my house for a year. Back at the South Pine Pavilion, at the stream of sword washing, they used me to mock you. You must have been annoyed by me back then, right?" Silence reigned. Lu Shui gradually calmed down. Looking at Jing Jiu on the cliff, he said seriously, "But I really didn't think of you like that." Obviously, he didn't finish his words, but he stopped here, because Jing Jiu raised his hand. Just like in the small village at the South Pine Pavilion at the stream of sword washing. With a gesture and a look, Lu Shui could understand what he meant. Jing Jiu felt that he talked too much and was very noisy. Lu Shui smiled bitterly and said no more. Lu Shui was taken away by the deacons of Shangda Peak. Later, the masters of Tianguang Peak would execute those cruel punishments, and then he would be expelled from Aoyama. Jing Jiu watched in silence as Lu Shui disappeared on the mountain path. He still didn't say anything. Countless gazes fell on him. Both the masters and the disciples were thinking that this man was really ruthless. Zhao Liu suddenly asked, "Was he telling the truth?" Jing Jiu was silent for a while, and then said, "The dream is still before the body, and the dream is still in the dream." "I'm not sure." Zhao Liu asked, "Why didn't you explain to him?" Jing Jiu said, I was just a guest staying in his house for a year, and I paid enough money. Despite such a big event, the sword trial had to go on, just like life. Jian Ruishan was severely wounded by Lu Shui, so he couldn't fight again. His opponent was lucky enough to win without a fight and enter the second round. As the next disciple on the list was about to enter the arena, Jing Jiu suddenly stood up. There was a slight commotion in the crowd. Many people thought he was too ashamed to stay here and was about to leave. Zhao Liu knew it wasn't the case. She thought with a smile, "Didn't he say that he was just a passerby?" Jing Jiu walked down the stone platform from the path between the cliffs and came to the arena. He lifted his head to take a look at the sword forest and found those stone pillars were indeed very high. The middle part of the pillars was shrouded by clouds and fog, so he couldn't see the top of the pillars clearly. The disciples didn't know what he was going to do and why he was standing there looking up at the sky. The disciple who was about to enter the arena didn't know what he should do either. Should he go up and ask him to get out of the way? Qian asked with raised eyebrows, "Young, Brother Jing, why are you standing here?" Jing Jiu pulled back his gaze and said, "I've made an appointment with the Zhongzhou school to play chess with Tong Yin at the Plum meeting next year." Everybody knew about such a famous event. Many disciples thought he was asking to be humiliated, and even humiliated his own sect. Besides, he was going to the Plum meeting next year. So what did it have to do with him standing here? "I just remembered that I have to be qualified to go to the Plum meeting, and I have to participate in the sword trial of Aoyama." Chapter 102. Qian was taken aback. He didn't expect Jing Jiu to say he wanted to participate in the sword trial after mentioning the Plum meeting. The others didn't expect it either. The stone forest was shrouded in an eerie silence. Qian came back to his senses and thought it was ridiculous. "You're not a disciple of the third generation anymore, so you can't participate in the sword trial," he said. "Then how can I participate in the Plum meeting?" Jing Jiu asked. Qian thought Jing Jiu was already a master of the second generation. If he really wanted to go to the Plum meeting and be humiliated by Tong Yin, he would have a way, like being the leader of the group. Jing Jiu said, "Many people won't be convinced if I can get the qualification to go to the Plum meeting without participating in the sword trial." The crowd thought, so you know it. Of course, no one was convinced by Jing Jiu, especially those disciples who had a high cultivation state and wanted to show their skills at the sword trial. They admitted that Jingjiu had a high talent in sword work, but he was too young and had a low cultivation state. If he hadn't been lucky enough to climb the top of Shima Peak with Zhao Liu, he wouldn't have become their senior master. So, I still have to participate. Jingjiu looked in the direction of the disciples of Liangwang Peak and said, "As long as I win, nobody will be convinced." Hearing this, the disciples of Aoyama were in an uproar, thinking this person was so arrogant. Qian thought for a while and said, "The drawing of lots is over. It's too late to arrange it now." Jingjiu said, "Just name someone." Jian Russian could name someone to challenge him, so he could name someone else to challenge. Many gazes followed Jingjiu's gaze to the second stone platform in the cliff. "Please advise me," Jingjiu said, while looking at a disciple of Liangwang Peak. That person was a little chubby and looked harmless to humans and animals. The fat disciple was called Ma Hua, an inconspicuous name. He was ranked 37th on Liangwang Peak, which was also inconspicuous. The disciples of Liangwang Peak were very famous, but many people didn't know him, which showed how low-key he was, or how easily he was neglected. The disciples couldn't understand why Jingjiu wanted to challenge this person by name. As for the outcome, Jingjiu was still in the state of inherited will. Theoretically, any disciple of Liangwang Peak could easily defeat him. However, not long ago, Jian Ruishan, ranked 46th on Liangwang Peak, was easily defeated by Lu Shui. Who knew if Jingjiu would surprise them again? The sword light moved slightly, and Ma Hua came to the scene. He looked at Jingjiu with a smile and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "How did you know that I was the one who reported Lu Shui?" Jingjiu said, "I don't know." Ma Hua's expression changed slightly. "Then why do you want to challenge me?" He thought he had guessed the truth. Jingjiu wanted to avenge Lu Shui. Jingjiu did not know that Shanghai Peak suspected that Lu Shui was involved in the death of Zui Yi of Bihu Peak because Ma Hua found that Lu Shui was not there that night. He also did not know that Ma Hua and Gu Han already knew that he was not there that night. In order to cover up for him, Lu Shui insisted on not saying where he was. He only knew that this inconspicuous fat man was the military counselor of Liangwang Peak, and the trap set by Lu Shui should be this person's plan. Most importantly, he had not liked this fat man since the stream of sword washing. Ma Hua stopped smiling and looked at him seriously. For years had passed, and he found that he still could not see through this young man. That was why he had been vigilant and even hostile toward him. "I know you must be hiding your strength. For example, no one has ever seen you ride a sword. But I am sure that you have been able to," he said to Jingjiu. "So, no matter who wins today, I can see some of your secrets. It is not bad." After saying this, he rode his sword, broke through the clouds, and landed on a stone pillar high up. Judging from the sword light, Ma Hua should be in the initial state of the undefeated, which was a bit ordinary by the standard of Liangwang Peak. Countless eyes fell on Jingjiu, full of curiosity. Many sword-washing disciples could ride a sword, not to mention the disciples participating in the sword trial today. Normally, Jingjiu should have been able to ride a sword, but no one had ever seen him do it. Some even thought that he had encountered some strange obstacles in his sword cultivation. People were curious to know how he was going to climb up the stone pillar that was more than 1,000 feet high. If he could not even climb up the stone pillar, how could he talk about the sword trial? Qian raised his right hand, inviting him to go ahead. Jingjiu untied the iron sword from his back and held it up in the air. This posture looked a bit weird, like a hunter walking into a dark forest with a torch in his hand. Seeing this, the disciples were slightly surprised, wondering what he was going to do. Qian thought of a possibility and raised his eyebrows slightly. Some gray-haired elders on the stone platform also felt they had seen it somewhere before. They wondered with uncertainty if this was the burning sky move of the 9-death sword formula. In ancient times, there were many ways for swordsmen to ride a sword. Later, there were fewer and fewer ways. Now, people only rode on swords. There was a reason for this. Riding on swords allowed one to come and go freely and easily. More importantly, when a practitioner stood on a sword, he could use his empty hands to perform the sword formula, which made it easier for him to attack. If one used other ways to ride a sword, he would need to hold the sword hilt with his hands, which would naturally be less flexible. A buzzing sound suddenly came from the bottom of the stone forest. Air billowed and gravel rolled. Jingjiu disappeared from where he was. No one realized what had happened. People looked up subconsciously and saw a hole in the clouds in the sky. They could vaguely see a black dot. Did he flee out of fear or something? Countless gazes fell on the sky. It was quiet. With a whistling sound of the sword, Jingjiu reappeared in people's sight, landing on a stone pillar. No matter what others thought of him, he was very calm. Zhao Liu felt a bit embarrassed and lowered her head to drink her tea. She guessed that it was because he hadn't flown on a sword for a long time, that he was a bit rusty and couldn't control it. So, he flew a bit too high. It was indeed very high. The masters of the Aoyama saw clearly that Jingjiu flew to the top of the Aoyama formation before he landed. They couldn't help but be amazed. He was still in the inherited will, but he could fly to such a height on a sword in such a short time. This young disciple was indeed a genius swordsman worthy of the expectations of the Aoyama. On a stone pillar dozens of feet away, Ma Hua's fat face showed a serious expression for the first time. He said, "I didn't expect your swordsmanship to be so good. I guess you're preparing to amaze the world at some point in the future. I feel sorry for you that you were forced to use it today." Jingjiu didn't say anything. He never rode on a sword in the past. It had nothing to do with hiding his strength and hoping to amaze the world at one point. He had his own reasons. Ma Hua smiled and suddenly jumped on his sword again, landing on a stone pillar further away. Now the distance between the two stone pillars was more than 300 feet. The flying sword of the disciples of the inherited will state couldn't kill more than 300 feet. Even if Jingjiu was talented and his swordsmanship was far superior to the ordinary disciples of the inherited will state, his flying sword would be like an arrow at the end of its flight in front of Ma Hua. Seeing this, the disciples of the Shanghai Peak and the other peaks frowned. Only the disciples of Liangwang Peak didn't change their expressions. They were familiar with Ma Hua's style of doing things. They knew he wouldn't miss any details and wouldn't care about other people's evaluation. He just wanted to win. Chapter 103. Before Jingjiu could react, Ma Hua made his move first. The sword whistled through the dense stone forest. A streak of sword light attacked Jingjiu. At such a distance, Jingjiu could not counterattack with his flying sword, so he could only choose to dodge. The only way he could defeat Ma Hua was to fly up on his sword and take the risk to shorten the distance between him and Ma Hua. That was what the disciple of Bihu Peak did when he fought against his senior brother of Tingguang Peak, whose realm was much higher than his. Ma Hua was good at scheming, so he had calculated everything clearly. He was ready to withdraw his flying sword and move backward again if Jingjiu could really avoid his flying sword and get close to him. Anyway, he had to keep a distance from Jingjiu so that he could be invincible. As for the shame of doing so, he did not consider it at all. Of course, it would be better if such a scene did not happen. Therefore, he was very serious when he attacked. He wanted to defeat Jingjiu with only one move. On the stone platform, Yunxing Peak Master suddenly waved his sleeve. An extremely powerful aura surged around the peaks. The clouds in the stone forest were affected by this aura, and slowly sank down until they fell to the ground, forming a layer of clouds about 2 feet thick. It was a beautiful scene, but everyone knew that Yunxing Peak Master did not want to create a scene, but to let the disciples on the ground see clearly what would happen next. The masters, including Yunxing Peak Master, were very curious about how Jingjiu would break the situation created by Ma Hua, and they wanted to let the disciples learn something from it. From this point of view, it was evident that they favored Jingjiu more in this fight. Go. Jingjiu used the method he was most familiar with to break Ma Hua's situation, and he only said one word. The iron sword pierced through the air and flew to the stone pillar more than 300 feet away. It was not accurate to use the word fly, because the iron sword was so fast that there was no residual shadow, and the sword light did not even have time to turn into a line. The spectators only saw a blur before their eyes. Just like when Jing Jiao had left the ground, the iron sword had already arrived between the two stone pillars. At this time, Ma Hua's flying sword was less than 20 feet away from the stone pillar. Looking at the iron sword, Ma Hua was shocked and frightened. He quickly used his sword essence to forcefully summon his flying sword in front of him. A crisp sound rang out. The wind howled above the stone forest, and the sound waves spread in all directions. At the critical moment, his sword blocked Jing Jiao's iron sword by a hair's breadth. He fell onto the stone pillar and was at a loss of what to do. His sea of consciousness trembled and rippled, and his sword pellet couldn't calm down. Jing Jiao's sword was so powerful. This was not only referring to the immense power contained in the sword, but also its speed. With a swoosh, Jing Jiao's iron sword turned back again. Still, there was no residual shadow, only a very short sword light. Ma Hua knew that he would not be able to block this sword. With a muffled groan, he stepped on the sword and fled further away without hesitation. A moment later, he landed on another stone post 100 feet away. Turning his head around, he found that the stone post he had been standing on had been cut by Jing Jiao's iron sword. Countless stone chips were falling down to the ground, looking like the heavy snowflakes dancing in the air. Ma Hua's face was pale, and his sword robe was soaked in cold sweat. Strategies and contingency plans were meaningless in the face of absolute speed and power. When the iron sword flew toward him, he even felt the aura of death. He did not dare to imagine what would have happened if he had reacted a little bit slower. In fact, he did not have time to think about this, because Jing Jiao's sword was coming again. The iron sword whistled through the air with great momentum. Ma Hua knew that he could not block this sword, and he could not avoid it either. He held the sword in front of him and shouted, "I admit." A loud bang resounded. Jing Jiao did not give him a chance to admit defeat. The iron sword swung down and cut off the word that Ma Hua was about to utter. Ma Hua spat out a mouthful of blood. He could not withstand it any longer and fell down from the stone pillar. The surprise screams could be heard everywhere on the peak. Jing Jiao didn't stop there. The iron sword chased after Ma Hua and continued to slash down. Strangely enough, Ma Hua managed to maintain the posture of holding the sword while falling down to the ground, but he managed to block most of the attacks. The iron sword kept hacking on his sword, like a heavy hammer pounding on it, making loud noises. Pa! Pa! The terrifying noises echoed on Tianguang Peak. Ma Hua landed heavily on the ground with a loud boom, scattering the ocean of clouds. The iron sword flew back. The disciples of Shuriyue Peak hurried over. Ma Hua was helped to his feet. His face was pale, his body covered in blood, and he was in an extremely sorry state. The physical strength of the cultivation practitioners was much stronger than that of mortals. He was not truly hit by Jing Jiao's sword. Though his sword pill was damaged and he was severely wounded, his life was not in danger. Looking at the figure on top of the stone pillar, a hint of fear showed in his eyes. "When did you break through the state?" he asked in a trembling voice. During the sword fight above the stone forest, Jing Jiao's flying sword could still exert such a powerful force from a distance of more than 300 feet. It could be said that Jing Jiao was gifted in this aspect. However, these stone pillars were more than 1,000 feet high, so the distance between Jing Jiao and Ma Hua was probably close to 2,000 feet. His sword could still follow Ma Hua and hack him from the sky to the ground before he could fly back. What did it prove? Only the disciples of the undefeated state could do it. Many people, like Ma Hua, had the same thought. Countless gazes were fixed on the figure above the stone forest. Just now, Jing Jiao's voice came from above the stone forest. There was an uproar. Yet, what Jing Jiao said was the truth. He had been preparing to break through the state of the undefeated while traveling with Zhao Liu, and he had sensed it last autumn. For some reason, to be exact, because of his physical condition, he had been hesitating. Until just now, when he saw Lu Shisui being beaten to the ground by Guanan Shan, he finally made up his mind. Ma Huan naturally didn't believe him. He squeezed out a bitter smile on his blood-stained face and said, "Is it necessary to fight with a fellow disciple?" As soon as he finished speaking, he spat out another mouthful of blood, with a few broken teeth in it, which were shaken off by Jing Jio's sword. Some people thought the scene of Ma Hua being smashed from the stone pillar to the ground by the iron sword was somewhat familiar. Then they remembered that not long ago, the scene of Lu Shui being disabled by Guananshan was exactly the same. This guy is still so vengeful. Lin Wuji thought of the inherited sword competition 3 years ago, when Jing Jio knocked Gu Qing 3 times and shook his head with a bitter smile. In front of him, Elder Bai Rujing frowned slightly, and no one knew what he was thinking. Elder Mo chuckled, seeming to appreciate Ma Hua's performance. In this sword fight, no one came to Ma Hua's rescue, and no one called for a stop because everyone could see that Jing Jio didn't use his full strength. Otherwise, how could the iron sword hit Ma Hua's sword so accurately every time? Of course, this was not because Jing Jio was being merciful. On the contrary, he wanted to beat Ma Hua to the ground in front of the disciples of Aoyama and humiliate Liang Wang Peak. There is nothing wrong with Ma Hua's response, and his deduction of the battle situation was quite accurate. However, it was meaningless in front of Jing Jio's sword. The only problem was that Jing Jio had come to Aoyama for only 6 years. How could he have such an abundant sword source? Qi Yin looked up at the top of the stone forest and asked, "Shall we continue?" Jing Jio knew that this elder of Shangda Peak should have guessed his intention, so he looked at the stone platform where the disciples of Liang Wang Peak were. "Please advise me." This time, he was looking at Gu Han. Chapter 104. There was an uproar. The disciples of Aoyama had figured out Jing Jio's intention. Did he want to challenge the entire Liang Wang Peak? Because he wanted to avenge Lu Shui? Of course, it was not for this reason, because Jing Jio and Liang Wang Peak had been enemies for a long time. The disciples of Aoyama spent most of their time in closed-door cultivation, but many of them knew what had happened by the stream of sword washing. It was rare for a disciple of Liang Wang Peak to be rendered speechless by an ordinary disciple of sword washing. Would Gu Han accept his challenge? There could be no other answer to this question. The sword light flickered. Gu Han landed on the stone pillar, looked at Jing Jio, and said, "I have always disliked you, but my opinion of you has changed today." He meant that Jing Jio was willing to stand up for Lu Shui and challenge Liang Wang Peak. Jing Jio understood what he meant and said, "My opinion of you has not changed. Many years ago, when Liang Wang Peak started to have a special status in Aoyama, he began to dislike it. Many years later, he still disliked Liang Wang Peak, such as the Fat Man and Guananshan. But he disliked Gu Han the most. This had something to do with his current disciple Gu Qing, but it was mostly because of Lu Shui. Maybe it was because Lu Shui had mentioned Gu Han too many times in the Manor Cave by the stream 4 years ago. He called Gu Han Big Brother too naturally and praised Gu Han as a good man. "Even if you break through the state of the undefeated, you are still no match for me." Gu Han looked at him and said emotionlessly, "I know I have a bad temper, but there is nothing wrong with my swordsmanship." Jing Jio said, "I once told you that in my opinion, your swordsmanship is all wrong. If the entire swordsmanship was wrong, then there must be something wrong with the swordsmanship." Gu Han remembered clearly that Jing Jio said the same thing to Guananshan 3 years ago at Shilai Peak. "Prove it to us." Gu Han waved his sleeve. A white sword light broke through the sky. The clouds in the sky suddenly twisted. Wherever the sword light passed, there was a faint sound of thunder. It carried with it countless fine threads of light, as if it was a lightning bolt that had shrunk countless times. He used Bihu Peak's 8 directions sword style. What was surprising was that Jing Jio's sword was really fast. Even though it was launched later, it arrived first. In the middle of the 2 stone pillars, the 2 flying swords collided, causing a loud noise. Accompanied by a wave of air, the iron sword flew back diagonally. No matter how abundant Jing Jio's sword energy was, he still couldn't rely on pure speed to make up for the gap in cultivation level. Guhan looked at him in silence. The white sword light continued forward. Jingjiu's expression did not change. He reached for the hilt of his sword and turned to leave. With a buzz, his figure disappeared from the stone pillar. In the next moment, he appeared on another stone pillar several hundred feet away. But at the same time, Guhan's sword arrived. Jingjiu seemed to be able to see what was happening behind him. He rode on his sword and dodged the sword, arriving at the cliff north of the stone forest. The iron sword flew in front of the cliff. Without the cover of the clouds, it could be seen very clearly. It attracted many exclamations from the ground. No one expected that Jingjiu's sword was so fast, and his riding speed was so amazing. Guhan's flying sword was like a maggot attached to the bone. It was getting closer and closer, but it couldn't catch up. How could riding a sword be as fast as a flying sword? What kind of speed was that? The situation now was completely different from the previous battle. Jingjiu seemed to be in a completely passive position like Ma Hua. Now that Guhan had the absolute advantage, he wouldn't miss it. With a cold look in his eyes, he made a sword gesture with his right hand. The white sword light suddenly lengthened and slashed towards the cliff. The iron sword suddenly turned around and dodged with Jingjiu. The white sword light rushed forward again. The iron sword dodged again. Several deep sword marks appeared on the cliff, and gravel fell down. Jingjiu rode his sword further away, and the white sword light chased after him. In a few seconds, they had arrived at the extreme west of the stone forest. The stone pillars here were much more sparse than in front of the peak, and there was a distance of more than 100 feet between each stone pillar. The sword light disappeared, and Jingjiu stopped on a stone pillar. At this time, he was already a few miles away from the stone platform in front of the peak. In the eyes of the crowd, he became a small black dot. Guhan was a swordsman in the upper state of the undefeated, but he couldn't attack from such a distance. He sneered, stepped on the flying sword that had been called back, and flew to where Jingjiu was. After a while, countless sword lights lit up in the west of the stone forest. Stone chips flew everywhere, and smoke and dust rose, blocking the sight of many disciples with lower states. The disciples knew that the battle was very fierce, but they couldn't see the specific situation, so they couldn't help but feel anxious. Some bold disciples disregarded the rules and rode their swords to the top of the stone forest. On the stone platform, many teachers also stood up and looked in that direction. The endless sword art is as dense as snow. I think it is more suitable to block the way than the 7-apricot sword art. Guhan is so familiar with it. It seems that he has worked hard for a few years. Look, senior brother Gu is still using the 8-side sword art. I'm afraid that even the senior brothers on Bihu Peak are not as familiar as him. Senior brother Gu really has the most profound attainment in the 6-dragon sword art. No wonder Gu Qing also learned this. The real sword of the 3 peaks is at his fingertips. Senior brother Gu is indeed the top 3 swordsmen in Liangwang Peak. He is really admirable. Don't forget that senior brother Gu was born in Tingwang Peak, and he hasn't used the inherited heaven sword art yet. What about the supreme sword of Liangwang Peak? That is the real level of senior brother Gu. As long as he uses it, Jingjiu will definitely lose. Amidst the praises, there were naturally many people who thought of another fact. Guhan's cultivation in swordsmanship was extremely high, and his swordsmanship was even more exquisite. However, Jingjiu's iron sword was still there. No matter how hard his sword was suppressed, after a period of time, his sword light would always reappear in front of everyone. This was truly a shocking matter. If he had just entered the state of the undefeated, how could he have held on for so long in front of a swordsman like Guhan? All the peak leaders and elders were able to clearly see the scene of the battle that was happening a few miles away. They were sure that Jingjiu was using the 9 Deaths sword art of Shinma Peak. It was rumored that before martial uncle Jingyang ascended, he hid the sword manual of the 9 Deaths sword art and the thoughtless sword on the top of Shinma Peak, and Zhao Liu found them that night. Now it seemed that the rumor was true. What surprised them was that Jingjiu's swordsmanship was extremely skillful. It didn't look like he had only practiced for 3 years, but more like he had practiced for 300 years. Moreover, when he used the nine-death sword art, it was obviously different from the rumored nine-death sword art. Some elders thought that youngest martial uncle's swordsmanship was so cold and aloof, and it was not as plain as Guhan's. Yes, the nine-death sword art in Jingjiu's hands was very plain. It didn't look like he was going to die. It was more like he had seen through life and death. No matter how strong Guhan's sword light was, the iron sword was still calm. It didn't look like it was at an absolute disadvantage. The sword light only lasted for a dozen breaths. It was still very short. But in Guhan's eyes, it was very embarrassing that he still couldn't defeat Jingjiu after such a long time. He couldn't accept it. He decided to end this fight as soon as possible. A clear howl burst out from his lips. His flying sword ignored Jingjiu's iron sword and suddenly accelerated. It turned into a dazzling white light and attacked Jingjiu's face. The iron sword was no longer blocked. It cut through the wind and almost cut his body at the same time. Guhan's expression didn't change. He crossed his hands in front of him and a strong aura appeared. Seeing this, Qian raised his eyebrows and guessed what he was going to do. An elder cried out in shock, Coldwell locking clear autumn. Chapter 105. It was the ninth move of the Shangda Peak's flowing snow sword art. This move was not a real sword art, but a secret method learned by the first peak master of the Shangda Peak from the Coldwell, which was used to deal with the flying sword. Guhan was going to use this secret method to lock Jingjiu's flying sword. Even if he had a secret method, it was still risky to deal with the flying sword with his bare hands. In the past, the disciples of Aoyama, who had mastered the flowing snow sword art, would only use this method in the most extreme situation. Now Guhan had the whole situation under control, but he still chose to use this method, which showed that he was extremely aggressive and didn't take Jingjiu seriously at all. A buzzing sound. Guhan put 2 fingers of his right hand together and pointed them in front of him like a small sword. He opened his left hand with 5 fingers in a circle. The iron sword was suspended in the middle and kept vibrating, but couldn't leave. The Coldwell locks autumn. He successfully locked Jingjiu's flying sword. Now it was time to see how Jingjiu would deal with his sword. In everyone's opinion, there would be no accident because Jingjiu didn't have a sword at this time. Without a sword, he couldn't ride the sword to dodge the attacks on the cliff like before. He had to take the attack with his body. No matter how strong the body of a sword cultivator was, even if he had the tempered body of sword like Zhao Liu and Lu Shui and was as hard as a rock, how could he face the flying sword head-on? Some elders were ready to save him with their swords. The 2 places were far apart, but there were many mighty figures in the Broken Sea state who could at least save Jingjiu's life. Zhao Liu stood up and looked over there attentively. The mountain wind suddenly blew, messing up her hair. In front of the stone platform, the thoughtless sword hovering in the air was vibrating slightly, making a low, buzzing sound, as if it could fly up at any time. No one noticed that the cold, 3-foot sword in front of the thoughtless sword was also vibrating slightly. In the end, the thoughtless sword didn't fly up, and the 3-foot sword didn't move. Countless exclamations were heard one after another among the peaks. Because Guhan's sword missed. There was also wind above the stone forest. Jingjiu's body was like the lightest sand, disappearing with the wind. The next moment, he appeared in the sky with more than 10 sword lights. Those sword lights came from his body. His hair and clothes fluttered in the wind like silk, and each strand was like a sword. The peak master of Qingrong stood up and stared in that direction, a strange expression flashing in her eyes, her sleeve trembling slightly. What kind of Dao technique was it to be able to traverse a distance of several hundred feet in the air? Even without a swordsman with a high level of cultivation could still use his sword breath to soar into the air. For example, Guinanshan had demonstrated this before. The problem was that Jingjiu had just entered the undefeated state, and he had already mastered such a difficult Taoist method. The most shocking thing was that his speed was unimaginably fast, completely exceeding the scope of Taoist magic. It even made people think of the heaven and earth escape technique of Zhongzhou school. Jingjiu appeared in front of Guhan. Guhan was using the locking autumn by Coldwell to control Jingjiu's sword, so he didn't expect this at all. Jingjiu's hand landed on the hilt of the sword, and he made a seemingly simple horizontal stroke. Guhan's hands could no longer lock Jingjiu's sword. Swish! The iron sword pierced through Guhan's body. Fresh blood gushed out from the tip of the sword, dripping down from the sky. Looking at the scene a few miles away, Guan had a grave expression on his face. He knew that Senior Master Qi Yin and the other senior masters wouldn't make a move at this moment. The senior masters should have seen clearly that Jingjiu's iron sword had pierced through Guhan's right chest. Guhan's injury was serious, but not fatal. The senior masters would think that Jingjiu would withdraw his sword after winning. Guan didn't think so, and he had a bad feeling. He could sense Jingjiu's murderous intent from a few miles away. He knew the relationship between Jingjiu and Lu Shisui. Even though they hadn't seen each other for 3 years, even though Lu Shisui was extremely disappointed in Jingjiu not long ago. Lu Shisui was tortured by Shanghai to peak, but he refused to tell them that he wanted to find Jingjiu that night. Now that Lu Shisui was in such a miserable state, what would Jingjiu do for him? Don't say he was heartless. If he was really heartless, why would he challenge Ma Hua and Guhan? Guan knew he had to make a move, even if he would be blamed later. If he didn't make a move now, he was worried that Guhan would really die. At this moment, someone finally realized something was wrong. Jingjiu didn't withdraw his sword. He pushed Guhan toward the cliff in the north. Guhan was seriously injured. Did he want to kill someone? Stop! The disciples of Tianguang Peak and Liangwang Peak shouted in surprise, but it was too late for them to stop the tragedy. Fortunately, a bright sword light pierced through the stone forest and arrived in front of the cliff a few miles away. Looking at the rainbow-like sword light, the disciples heaved a sigh of relief. Not long ago, when Lu Shisui tried to kill Jian Riyun with the devil fire, he was stopped by this sword light. Now that the big brother in the state of free travel was wielding his sword, there was nothing to worry about. The powerful sword light hacked toward Jingjiu's back. If Jingjiu wanted to block this sword, he had to turn around and draw the iron sword out of Guhan's body. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectation, especially Guananshan's. Jingjiu didn't do anything. He didn't draw the sword out, nor did he turn around. It seemed that he didn't know that a sword light had arrived behind him and would cut him in half in the next moment. Oh no, Guananshan said to himself. He saw that Jingjiu's hand had left the hilt of the sword and stopped the attack. But why didn't he dodge or block it? Guananshan didn't have time to think about it. All he knew was that if his flying sword were to fall down, Jingjiu would die for sure. He was well aware that Jingjiu was a rare talent in sword work that many masters had high hopes for. If this person continued to attack Guhan, he would kill him without hesitation. But under the current circumstances, he couldn't and didn't want to kill him. However, he had just entered the state of free travel, and a few miles was his limit. It was difficult for him to control the flying sword, and he couldn't move back and forth freely. He grunted, and the sword pill suddenly shrank. He forcefully withdrew the sword source, attempting to stop the flying sword a few miles away. The rainbow-like sword light disappeared. The flying sword finally stopped. The tip of the sword was less than 2 feet away from Jingjiu's back. It was a dangerous scene. All of a sudden, Jingjiu turned around and put his hands together, clamping the flying sword. Judging from his posture, it looked like the ritual of the Zen Buddhism. The expression on Guananshan's face changed slightly. He tried to call back the flying sword, but found it didn't work. He was a swordsman in the state of free travel, much stronger than Jingjiu, but the sword was in Jingjiu's hands, a few miles away from him. And Jingjiu's hands were even tougher than Guhan's locking autumn by the cold well. The great mercy hands. The peak master of Yunqing stood up, wondering in shock how Jingjiu knew the secret method of the Guoqing temple. The peak masters and elders who had recognized Jingjiu's method all had the same idea, but they remained silent at the same time, strangely. The peak master of Qingrong looked at the other side in silence, interested in what Jingjiao would do next. The peak master of Shilai, Peak finally put down the teacup he had been holding for a long time, looking at the other side with narrowed eyes, his expression solemn. Jingjiao crossed his hands and held the two ends of the flying sword. No! No one knew who was shouting. Jingjiao didn't pay attention to the shout and put more force into his hands. The flying sword in his hand gradually bent, emitting an extremely unpleasant sound. Fresh blood seeped out from between his hands and the edge of the sword. "Show some mercy." Someone's voice reverberated among the peaks. Jingjiao looked at Guananshan in silence from a few miles away. Huh. The flying sword broke in half. Guananshan spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. Chapter 106. Guananshan had just entered the state of free travel, so it was difficult for him to control the flying sword several miles away. His flying sword was destroyed, but his injuries would not be any lighter. Shameless. The disciples of Liangwang Peak were so angry that they all flew up on their swords. Dozens of sword lights illuminated the stone forest and were about to attack the west. Qian came to the sky on his sword and waved his sleeve. These young disciples couldn't bear the attack of a swordsman in the upper state of free travel. A strong wind suddenly rose, and the dozens of sword lights were disrupted and forced to retreat to the cliff. Qian shouted in a deep voice, "What do you want to do? Do you want me to punish you with the sect rules?" The disciples of Liangwang Peak were so angry that they couldn't bear to listen. Guananshan wiped the blood off the corner of his mouth, looked at his younger brothers and sisters, and said, "I was careless. It's none of his business." It was extremely quiet in the peak. Countless eyes fell on Jingjiao. Those eyes were complicated. Some were full of hatred, some were full of anger, but most of them were full of shock. Jingjiao had done something unimaginable. He challenged Liangwang Peak by name, unexpectedly showed the strength of the state of undefeated, and defeated Ma Hua easily. If this was normal, Guhan, who ranked third on Liangwang Peak, was also defeated by his sword. The most shocking thing was that he broke Guananshan's sword. The key to victory was Jingjiao's hands. He put his hands together and clamped Guananshan's sword. Guhan dared to use Locking Autumn by Coldwell because his state was much higher than Jingjiao's, so it was reasonable for him to use such a powerful fighting method. Jingjiao's state was much lower than Guananshan's, so why did he dare to do this? It couldn't be explained by courage. Whether it was Locking Autumn by Coldwell or the Great Mercy Hand of Guochang Temple, it was necessary to activate the sword source in advance to lock a flying sword with both hands. Jingjiao had predicted that Guananshan would attack, and he even predicted the exact time when Guananshan would do it. He had been waiting for it. This kind of fighting method was really unimaginable. After the disciples calmed down and thought about it carefully, they couldn't help but feel that it was a bit scary, but they couldn't tell what was scary about it. The Peak Masters and Shi Yin could see clearly that Jingjiao had defeated Guhan by calculating the battle situation. He took into account Guhan's temperament, his possible responses, the distance between the stone pillars, the position of the cliff, and even Guananshan's reaction. As a result, Guananshan was defeated without even using his sword. This kind of computing power, the mountain wind blew gently. The master of Shilai Peak was lost in thought as his white eyebrows fluttered in the wind, thinking that Jingjiao might be able to have a match with Tong Yen on the go board at the Plum meeting next year. Those who had watched the two sword battles had to admit that Jingjiao had displayed his sword Dao cultivation and strength, but there were still many who were not convinced, especially the disciples of Qianguang Peak and Liangwang Peak. They were not convinced on behalf of Guananshan. Guananshan was the principal disciple of the sect master of Aoyama, and also the principal disciple of Liangwang Peak, so he had a high reputation among his peers. Today, he had demonstrated the strength of the state of free travel for the first time. Even though Jingjiao was a rare genius in sword work, how could he be his match? In the eyes of many disciples, Jingjiu would have died if their big brother hadn't forcefully pulled back his sword because he couldn't bear to attack. Jingjiu didn't feel grateful, but took advantage of the opportunity to attack. It was extremely shameless. But they didn't realize that Guan Nanshan's intention was to save Guhan, but in fact, it was 2 against 1. I didn't ask anyone to stop. No one is allowed to draw out their swords. Otherwise, it would be against the rules. Moreover, he used his sword to sneakily attack a master. Looking at those disciples who were still not convinced, Qi Yin said in a low voice, "For the sake of his concern for his peers, Shangda Peak won't punish him for offending his superiors." Hearing this, many disciples came back to their senses, feeling even more upset and angry. Jingjiu wasn't an ordinary disciple participating in the sword trial. He was the senior uncle. Though Guhan was seriously injured, his life was not in danger. After a simple treatment, he was helped back to the field by his junior brothers. If you were so capable, you should have stood out when Lu Shui was in trouble, he said to Jingjiu with hatred. Jingjiu said, "I stood out now, but it seems that you are not ready to bear the consequences." His words attracted even more angry gazes. Zhao Liu stood up. A light blue pearl, emitting a faint fluorescent light, fell from the sky, falling from the deepest part of the great formation of Aoyama to her, and then she put it into her sleeve. "Shima Peak wants a place." After saying this, she took Jingjiu and flew up on her sword. The red sword light drew a straight line, leading to Shima Peak. By dusk, the sword trial of Aoyama had come to an end. Yao Songzhan and other 8 disciples were qualified to participate in next year's plum meeting. The last place belonged to Jingjiu, though he didn't stay until the end. Zhao Liu made a clear request as the master of Shinma Peak, and he had defeated Guhan fair and square. Everybody had to admit that he was absolutely qualified. The masters and disciples of the peaks left one after another. For a moment, the sky was filled with sword lights, and the sunset seemed to be torn into countless red ribbons. Yet the peak masters didn't leave. The setting sun shone on the stone platforms and the cliffs. It was quiet. As the principal disciple of the sect master and the principal disciple of Liangwang Peak, Guan Nanshan had a high status in Aoyama, and the regular elders were far less important than him. Normally, even though Jingjiu was the senior uncle, he should pay a price for hurting him in such a way. There were only 4 young people and a group of monkeys in Shinma Peak, so they didn't have much power in Aoyama. Yet, the peak masters didn't express any opinion, and they even had the intention to protect Jingjiu. Even the master of Tianguang Peak had kept silent, not to mention Elder Mo and Bai Rujing, who had always admired Jingjiu. There could only be one explanation for this. They thought that Jingjiu was more important than Guhan or Guan Nanshan for the Aoyama sect. No matter how sharp Jingjiu was in the use of sword and how powerful his calculation ability was, he had to have the ability to make it happen if he wanted to achieve such an incredible feat. Until now, the peak masters still couldn't forget the 2 scenes of the fight. Jingjiu's hands clamped the sword. The other scene was Guhan locked Jingjiu's sword, and Jingjiu suddenly disappeared from the stone pillar and appeared in front of Guhan the next moment. The peak masters were big shots in Aoyama's sect, and they had seen many geniuses and unimaginable things on the long road of cultivation. Why were they so impressed by this scene, and why were they so cautious? Because they were the only ones who noticed a detail in that scene. When Jingjiu stepped on the air and appeared in front of Guhan, his fluttering clothes and even his hair were carrying rays of sword light. Is it really the born sword body? The voice of Yunqing Peak Master was a little hesitant because he couldn't believe his own judgment. There had always been a speculation in the cultivation world. What would happen if the sword pill in a cultivator's body didn't merge with the flying sword, but with the cultivator himself? Chapter 107. In the end, humans were not swords. An idea that could not be verified could only be a guess. Therefore, the theory of the innate sword constitution could only be a hypothesis. If that's not the innate sword constitution, what could it be? The peak master of Bihu, Chun Yutian, who had been silent all this while, finally spoke. The ordinary disciples could not understand what had happened in that instant. But how could these great experts who had cultivated the sword for many years not be shocked? "What's with his hands?" The peak master of Shuriwes said with furrowed brows. "The swords of South Mountain are not ordinary flying swords." As the head disciple of Aoyama's sect master, Guananshan's sword was definitely not an ordinary one. It was called the Blue Ocean, a second-tier immortal sword. About that sword, there was another story, or rather a story. It was said that in order to allow Guananshan, who was still a sword-washing disciple at the time, to obtain this sword, an elder of the Gu family returned the sword to Aoyama in advance. In order to gain the approval of the Blue Ocean sword, Guananshan had spent 2 whole years. Compared to Zhuoruzhui and Zhao Leu, he was much slower. A famous sword was broken just like that. Who knew how many years it would take to reforge it again? The peak masters also felt that it was a pity. Even if Jingjiu really knows the Guochang Temple's Great Mercy Hand, it's impossible for him to catch this sword. Logically speaking, anyone who attempted to grab the sword known as Blue Sea like Jingjiu had done would first have their fingers cut off, followed by their palms. The peak master of Shuriwes said with furrowed brows, "Unless that guy has also practiced the golden body." The master of Shilai Peak said, "Shanghai to Peak already suspected it 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when the Shinma Peak reappeared in the world, Qian had said that Jingjiu might have practiced the invincible Vajra technique. At that time, the Yunqing Peak elder even joked that Jingjiu liked to touch people's heads. Could it be that the monk's enlightenment had become a habit? No one in Aoyama's sect believed this deduction. They treated it as a joke. However, they did not understand why the usually serious Shanghai Peak would make such a joke. Now, it seemed that Shanghai Peak really didn't joke around. Several gazes fell on the 3-foot sword. The Peak Masters knew that the callous old man was listening to their conversation. The Lord of Shilai Peak said slowly, "With the indestructible Vajra divine body and the support of my Aoyama sword Dao, he might really be able to achieve the innate sword body." The Peak Master of Qingrong asked, "What do those monks want to do?" If he had already achieved Dharmakaya before he left the temple, he would definitely be a true genius. How could such a disciple be allowed to leave? However, Jingjiu has already become a disciple of my Aoyama. Even if he is a monk from the Guochang Temple, there will only be benefits for him. If this was true, according to the rules of experiencing the secular world, even if Jingjiu wanted to return to the Guochang Temple in the future, Aoyama would have to come back to help. Not enough. The Lord of Shilai Peak said, after a moment of hesitation, if he stayed in the Guochang Temple for 10 years, he would have to stay in Aoyama for 10 years. At least we have to make sure that both sides have the same amount of time. I'll discuss this with the Big Brother sect master. Please don't tell anyone else about this, and don't ask the Guochang Temple. We'll pretend that we know nothing about it. This was the meaning of dividing Jingjiu into 2. The Peak Masters agreed in unison. Jingjiu's current cultivation state was still ordinary. Breaking Guananshan's sword was merely a trick, but everybody could see his future prospects. If their speculation was true, the Guochang Temple had helped the Windy Broadsword sect produce a Broadsword King, and the Aoyama sect would probably have a Sword King 100 years later. Back at the Shima Peak, Zhao Leu took out the glowing bead from her sleeve and handed it to Gu Qing and Yang Yuan. Gu Qing took it over cautiously and took Yang Yuan back to the cave residence. He released a sword will onto the bead. The bead projected countless beams of light onto the cliff wall, forming a blurry picture, but it was enough for people to see clearly that it was the scene of today's sword trial in Aoyama. This was the retrograde bead, which could roughly record some light and shadow pictures. It was said that Zhongzhou School also had a magic treasure called the Heavenly Retrieval Bead, which could vividly reproduce what had happened in the past, and could even record the sounds at that time. However, the Heavenly Retrieval Bead was too precious, so it was locked in the Butian Pavilion in Zhongzhou, and nobody had ever seen it. The dusk had faded, and the night was getting darker. The stars were twinkling, and the teapot was very quiet. Jingjiu sat on the edge of the cliff, looking at a mountain in the distance in silence. No one knew what he was thinking. Zhao Lei walked to him and asked in a low voice, "Do you want to talk for a while?" After a moment of silence, Jing Jiu said, "I didn't talk much before, but now I talk a lot. Everything in the world is changing, and everything has its own reason. But I still don't understand why they live so seriously and are willing to live for others. I understand the reason, but I can't accept it." Zhao Lei knew he was talking about Liangwang Peak, or to be more specific, Lu Shui, so she didn't know how to respond. Jing Jiu continued, "My cultivation speed is too slow." Zhao Lei thought this sentence was not in line with his temperament. What happened to him? "I know what's ahead, but I still have to keep walking there and see the scenery I've seen before. It's really boring, so I'm not in a hurry," Jing Jiu said, "but today is the first time I've felt a sense of urgency." Zhao Lei asked why. Looking at her, Jing Jiu said seriously, "If I were in the Broken Sea state, I could beat up by Rujing." Zhao Lei was speechless, thinking that he had beaten up the three most important disciples of Liangwang Peak today, but he was still not satisfied. It seemed that the thing about Lu Shui wouldn't end so easily. A dozen rays of light gradually returned to the retrograde pearl. The night luminescent pearl began to emit light again, illuminating the manor cave as if it were daytime. Gu Qing's expression was grave, and Yang Yuan's face was pale. The image in the retrograde pearl was blurry and soundless, but they understood what had happened today. Lu Shui's cultivation was abolished, and he was expelled from Aoyama. Jing Jiu challenged the disciples of Liangwang Peak in succession, and even made the principal disciple of the sect master vomit blood. The two looked at each other and saw the shock in each other's eyes. Gu Qing patted Yang Yuan's shoulder and comforted him, saying, "It's okay." Before today's sword trial, he knew something bad would happen, but he didn't expect it to be so serious. Fortunately, Lu Shui managed to save his own life, and the two senior masters didn't suffer any losses. Yang Yuan was a bit envious, thinking that Jing Jiu had lived in Shima Peak for 3 years, so he didn't panic in such a big event. He said, "Big brother, you are so calm." Gu Qing said, "Senior Master Gu is the Peak Master, and you are the principal disciple of Shima Peak. I should call you Big Brother." Yang Yuan didn't want to comply, saying, "Of course we should follow the order of entry." Gu Qing shook his head and said, "If we follow the order of entry, I'm not the Big Brother either." Yang Yuan didn't understand, asking, "Then who is it?" Looking at the night sky outside the peak, Gu Qing said after a long silence, "Our Big Brother. I don't know if he can come back." Chapter 108. In the deep night, monkeys' cries suddenly came from the cliffs, and then it became quiet again, as if they were startled by something. Gu Qing and Yang Yuan walked out of the cave residence and were surprised to see the figure walking up the mountain path, especially Gu Qing. The man was wearing a blue sword robe, which looked like ink in the night, but it was very clean instead of dirty. Why did Guinan Shan come to Shima Peak in the middle of the night? Did he come to make trouble because of the injury during the day? Gu Qing had been Guinan Shan's sword boy for many years. Now that he met his former master in Shinma Peak, he couldn't help but feel a bit unnatural. He cupped his hands in front of his chest and didn't say anything. Jing Jiu sat in the bamboo chair, ignoring him and not getting up. In terms of seniority, he was Guinan Shan's senior uncle, so it was normal for him to do so. However, Guinan Shan was the principal disciple of the sect master and had a special status. No matter which peak he went to, he would be given a seat by the peak master. He had never been treated like this before, but he didn't respond and sat down on a big rock by the cliff. Yang Yuan glanced at Gu Qing nervously, asking with his eyes if he should make tea for the guest. Gu Qing stood where he was and didn't move. When he saw Guinan Shan a moment ago, he naturally went to the cliff to make tea. He was used to doing this when he was in Liangwang Peak. He knew that Guinan Shan liked the cheap jasmine tea and liked to boil a bowl of black tea with a Wessie iron kettle before going to bed. But he soon came to himself. He was no longer a sword boy of Liangwang Peak, but a disciple of Shima Peak. He only needed to listen to his master. If Jing Jiu asked him to make tea, he would do it. If Jing Jiu didn't say anything, he wouldn't. It was that simple. Without looking at Gu Qing, Guananshan picked up the teapot on the table, poured a cup of cold water, and drank it. He said, "My lungs are injured, so I get thirsty easily." His injury was caused by Jing Jiu, but his voice was very calm. He was just explaining, "This matter has nothing to do with you. It was my own mistake." Looking at Jing Jiu, Guananshan said, "A few days ago, I broke into the free travel state, so I was too proud. Today, I tried to use the sword beyond my ability, so I learned this lesson." Jing Jiu glanced at him. Guananshan continued, 3 years ago, I told you that you might have some misunderstanding about Liangwang Peak. Now it seems that the misunderstanding is deep." Jing Jiu asked, "You want to clear up the misunderstanding?" Guananshan shook his head and said, "What you see may not be the truth, let alone words. You said that our paths are different, so don't force it." Jing Jiu said, "Then why did you come to Shinma Peak?" Guananshan said, "I'm here to tell you that if something like this happens again in the future, I hope you won't go too far like you did today." Jing Jiu said nothing. Guananshan continued, "This is a request, not a show of weakness. Young brother Guhan already knows your style of sword fighting, so he won't be defeated by you again." He didn't mention himself, since Jing Jiu couldn't even defeat Guhan, not to mention him. Jing Jiu said to him, "If you just want to talk about these strange things, don't come here again." This meant that he wanted to see the guest out. In other words, he wanted the guest to leave. Gu Qing stepped forward and raised his right hand, indicating that he should leave. Guananshan took a deep look at him without saying anything. Visiting Shima Peak at night was to visit the senior master, and his sword was broken, so Guananshan chose to walk. Leaving the peak top and coming to the cliff, he couldn't help but shake his head when he saw the wooden hut occupied by the apes. Looking back, the lonely peak was like a sword under the sky, full of stars. Among the 9 peaks of Aoyama, this peak was the loneliest, so it was the most desolate. He came here tonight for a reason. His divine sword was broken, and he was badly injured. He came in the middle of the night, but he didn't blame him, only gave suggestions. He felt that he had shown enough kindness and grace, but he didn't expect Jing Jiu to be so indifferent. Then he thought of Gu Qing, the sword boy who had served him for many years, and he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Did this lonely peak have some magic power that made everyone who came here become like the senior granduncle? If you fight with Guhan again, do you think you have a chance? Zhao Liu walked out of the cave residence and asked Jing Jiu. She heard what Guananshan said. Jing Jiu said, "I told you that my talent in sword fighting is the best in Aoyama." Zhao Liu asked, "Even if he adapts to your style of sword fighting?" Jing Jiu said, "You have to remember one thing." Zhao Liu listened carefully. Gu Qing and Young Yuan had a focused look on their faces. Jing Jiu said, "Everything is a sword. How can there be only one style?" 300 miles from the Tianguang Peak to the South Pine Pavilion. 300 miles from the South Pine Pavilion to the small village. It would only take 2 hours to ride the sword. Even if the sword source was not strong enough and he needed to rest and meditate from time to time, it would only take half a day at most. It would take 8 or 9 days to walk. It would take a whole month for a person whose cultivation had just been destroyed and his sword pill destroyed. Back in the small village, Lu Shui seemed to have regained some kind of strength as he looked at the bamboo forest and the pond that he hadn't seen for 3 years. His weak steps became steady. He walked to the front of the small courtyard and looked at the half-closed wooden door. After a long hesitation, he called out, "Father, I'm back." At night, Lu Shui was lying on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. Through the thin mud wall, he could hear the voices in the next room clearly. The disappointed and angry curses had been replaced by long sighs and groans. If Lu Shui's mother hadn't stopped him in time, and he was indeed weak, Lu Shui's father would have broken the stick in his hand. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui's mother cried again. Looking at the ceiling, Lu Shui felt pain in his heart. His sword pill was destroyed, and his meridians were broken. He was still in pain even after a whole month. The only thing that comforted him was that his parents were in good health, just like the last time he came back. Their hair was black without any white hair, and there were no wrinkles on their faces. The next day, many villagers heard the news and came to the Liu family. The old village head inquired about the situation and smoked the tobacco pipe for a long time, but he couldn't say anything to comfort Liu Shisui. All he did was pat Liu Shisui's shoulder. On the third day, Liu Shisui felt he had rested enough, so he walked out of the house. It was spring plowing, and the farm work was heavy. He wanted to help. There was a distance from his house to his family's fields. He saw many villagers on the road. There were uncles and brothers he was familiar with, and there were also some children he didn't know. Those children should have been born in the 7 years he had been in Aoyama. Whether it was the villagers he knew or the children he didn't know, they would turn away when they saw him. When he walked past, people's gazes would fall on him again, or more accurately, on his back. The emotions in those gazes were complicated. There was mockery, disdain, and fear. Liu Shisui could feel all this, but he didn't turn back. When he came to his family's fields, he found that they were already watered. The water was quiet, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds. Liu Shisui's father was dividing the seedlings. Liu Shisui's mother had just fetched 2 pots of spring water and was preparing to go home to cook. Seeing him come, she didn't say anything. Taking the seedlings from his father's hands, Liu Shisui stepped into the paddy field. His feet sank into the mud, and he couldn't stand firm. Adding to his weakness, he fell on his butt. Laughter came from the paddy field nearby, but for some reason, it quickly disappeared. Then came the sound of beating, cursing, and crying. The blue sky and white clouds reflected on the water scattered into pieces. Liu Shisui sat in the paddy field for a while before he remembered that he was already a cripple. Chapter 109. Even if a disabled person wanted to become an ordinary person again, it would take a lot of effort. Liu Shisui sat in the paddy field and thought silently. His father ignored him and continued to plant the seedlings in silence. His back was very bent. "Why are you still sitting there?" His mother pulled him up from the field and hit him twice with tears in her eyes. On the 4th day, Liu Shisui didn't go out of the house. He woke up before the sun rose, washed up, and started to do arrow steps. This was the entry-level martial arts of the Aoyama sect. He knew that he couldn't use this to cultivate again, but he thought it could help him recover his strength. After a while, his forehead was covered with soybean-sized beads of sweat. He knew that he was still very weak and couldn't force himself to continue, so he decided to rest. During the rest time, he conveniently swept the small courtyard of his house. On the 5th day, Liu Shisui continued to do arrow steps. When his clothes were soaked with sweat, he actually felt a little happy. During the rest time, he went to the vegetable field behind the yard to pick some chilies and cabbages. Then he washed them carefully. His mother came back to cook. She rubbed her eyes when she saw the clean kitchen and vegetables. On the 6th day, Liu Shisui also started to practice boxing, but different from when he was at the South Pine Pavilion, he didn't make any sound when he punched. It was very quiet. He went to the vegetable field and picked some tender daylilies. When he returned to the kitchen, he saw a piece of pork and thought for a while before cutting it. He rarely came back in the past few years in Aoyama, but he remembered Jing Jiu's words and sent a lot of money home, so the Liu family didn't have a hard time now. His mother came back home and saw the steaming pot. She was stunned for a while, then she shouted out of the window, "You start the fire tomorrow. I'll help you cook more before coming back." On the 7th day, besides squatting and boxing, Liu Shisui also started to run. In the backyard, he found that the eaves were damaged by last year's rainstorm. After cooking, he roasted a grass carp and grabbed some salted vegetables. He carried the ladder to the backyard and worked for the whole afternoon. On the 8th day, in addition to these things, Liu Shisui also chopped a pile of firewood. Just like when he was young, it looked very nice. On the 9th day, he went to the fields. The planting season was coming to an end. If it didn't go now, it would be too late. Father Liu did not say anything. He handed over a towel and indicated for him to wrap it around his neck. He did not know if it was to prevent the wind or the insects in the paddy fields. Liu Shisui lowered his head and focused on his work. The blue sky and white clouds in the water turned into a sunset. He raised his head and felt his back aching. Looking to the side, he realized that he had only done 1/5 of his father's work. He was not in a hurry and thought that it would be better to take it slow. Moreover, he was very satisfied that the seedlings he had planted were very straight. No matter if it was horizontal or vertical, it was a perfectly straight line. Why are you poking it? You can't make a living just by looking good. Father Lu walked past him. Lu Shui laughed. Could it be that this guy was born too good-looking, so he pursued good-looking? He subconsciously looked to the mountain road at the entrance of the village. There was no one. In the following days, Lu Shui was like a young laborer in the village, doing hard farm work. His body gradually recovered, and his face darkened again. In the first few days, he would occasionally stand up from the fields and look at the entrance of the village, but no one appeared. After that, he never looked at the entrance of the village again. After the spring plowing came the summer harvest, and after the autumn harvest came the difficult winter. It was boring to stay in the village, so they went to the mountains to look for prey. Father Lu and Mother Lu had already accepted the reality. There was laughter in the house again, and the villagers accepted him again. Some people even wanted to be a matchmaker for him, but he declined. He seemed to have forgotten everything that had happened in the past. Cultivating an aoyama was like an unreal dream. As he traveled through the mountains, there would occasionally be a few flashes of sword light in the sky. He stopped and looked at the sky in silence until the flashes of sword light disappeared. No one knew what he was thinking. Not long after winter, it was spring again. Just like that, a year had passed. The paddy fields were watered again, and the blue sky and white clouds once again covered the fields. The villagers were about to welcome the 2 most difficult days of the year. In the evening, Lu Shui used a hoe to dig up the soil, ready to fill the gap at any time. He looked at the water in the fields and rubbed his waist. His ambition grew. He thought that tomorrow he would do more than his father, and he would be straighter than that guy. You used to be born with Tao quality, but now you have to work hard to become a farmer. How pitiful. A cold and malicious voice came from behind. Lu Shui looked back and saw a man standing on a green tree. The man was dressed in black and wore a strange-shaped hat. His appearance was ordinary, but his aura was extremely gloomy. Lu Shui didn't pay attention to him, turning his head around to continue. You are indeed a disciple of the Aoyama sect. You are already in such a situation, but you are still so arrogant. You don't even ask about my background? The man in black said, I am from the mysterious dark sect. Hearing this, Lu Shui's hand holding the hoe tightened a bit. The mysterious dark sect was a famous deviant sect, and the orthodox sects represented by the Aoyama sect had always been at odds with each other. If a disciple of the mysterious dark sect suddenly appeared in front of him, Lu Shui wouldn't hesitate to draw his sword and fight him. However, he didn't have a sword in his hand now, only a hoe. As such, he didn't do anything but keep on working. The messenger of the mysterious dark sect thought it was interesting. This abandoned disciple of Aoyama didn't try to escape, nor did he attack bravely. It was as if nothing had happened. I like you, so I've decided to help you. The messenger of the mysterious dark sect drifted down from the tree and said to Jing Jiao, though your meridians are broken and your sword pill is destroyed, it doesn't matter as long as you are still alive. As long as you are willing to come with me, I can help you recover your strength. You don't need to pack your stuff. You can find everything on the cold mountain. This place is too close to Aoyama, so I don't want to be discovered by your former colleagues. The Cold Mountain was a general name for the high mountains in the northwestern snowland of Chaotian, including Kunlun Mountain, Heavenly Mountain, and Crow Mountain, and the headquarters of the mysterious dark sect. Lu Shui still didn't pay attention to him. The messenger of the mysterious dark sect said with a cold expression, I'll kill you if you keep behaving like this. Lu Shui knew that he was telling the truth. For the disciples of the deviant sects, killing was a casual thing to do. I know the reason why the devil fire can't be extinguished. Lu Shui put down the hoe and said to him, if I want to continue my cultivation this way, I have my own way. The messenger of the mysterious dark sect was startled. He was certain that he had a way to help Lu Shui recover from his injury and continue his cultivation. Otherwise, his sect wouldn't have observed him in secret for a whole year. Yet, he didn't expect Lu Shui to know the 4 words, "The devil fire can't be extinguished," which was the key to that method. Since you know it's possible, why didn't you do it? He thought it was unimaginable. For a crippled genius in cultivation, wasn't it the most important thing for him to be able to resume his cultivation? If it were any other cultivation practitioner in the same situation as Lu Shui, they would seize such an opportunity at all costs. Many of them would even kill their parents if they were asked to do so. Why did Lu Shui behave so calmly? He had been farming in this small village for a year and hadn't tried it all? It's because it's the method of the deviant sections. Lu Shui spoke in a natural tone, as if he were talking about the most natural thing in the world. How could a disciple of the orthodox sects cultivate the method of the deviant sects? Well, he wasn't a disciple of Aoyama anymore, and he wasn't even a cultivation practitioner, but he would still do it. A farmer should also walk the orthodox path. The messenger of the mysterious dark sect stared at him for a long time and asked, "Are you stupid?" Lu Shui thought about it and said, "Maybe a little. People like you are what I'm most afraid of in my life. You're so damn troublesome." The messenger of the mysterious dark sect turned around and left after saying this. Chapter 110. At night, Lu Shui lay on the bed, staring at the stars outside the window in a daze. He hadn't had insomnia for a long time, until the people of the mysterious dark sect came to disturb his peaceful life in the village. Over the past year, he had gradually realized why Jingjiu seldom spoke and liked to stare blankly. It was because he had too many things on his mind. He got up early in the morning and told his parents that he had something to attend to, so he wouldn't go to the fields for the time being. It didn't take long before someone knocked on the courtyard door. He pushed open the courtyard door and found it was an old scholar. His long blue robe had been washed so many times that it had turned white, and his beard had turned white as well, giving off an aura of virtue and prestige. Feeling surprised, Lu Shui asked, "Has someone else come?" "Yes," said the old scholar. Lu Shui asked, "May I ask for your advice?" "Yamatai," said the old scholar. Lu Shui was shocked, and then he felt a deep sense of veneration. Speaking of the orthodox cultivation sects in Chaotian, the Western Sea Sword School and the Windy Broadsword sect were the most popular in recent decades. But in terms of resources and status, Zhongzhou School, Aoyama sect, Guocheng Temple, and Yamatai were the best. The people in Yamatai were all scholars, and they had always kept a low profile, but nobody dared to doubt their prowess. The old scholar said, "The one who came yesterday had only watched you for 3 days, but I've watched you for 3 months. I'm certain that I like you very much, so I came here today." "I like Yamatai too," said Lu Shui. What he said was the truth. In many people's eyes, Yamatai was a scholar with a strong temperament, and his talk would harm the country. However, during the years when the Snowy Kingdom invaded the south and the royal lineage was severed, the scholars of Yamatai had sacrificed their lives for the country, more than those of the Aoyama sect and Zhongzhou School combined, so they deserve to be respected. "Please sit down." Lu Shui brought out a chair. The old scholar sat down and said, "I already know about your conversation yesterday." The scholar of Yamatai knew that the disciples of the Black Moon sect were nearby, but he did not go and slay the demons. This was already somewhat problematic. From this sentence, he could hear that they seemed to know each other. Lu Shui was a little surprised. He seemed to have thought of something. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Why are you looking for me?" The old scholar replied, "Of course it's to take you away." Lu Shui looked into his eyes and asked, "To Yamatai?" The old scholar was silent for a while, then said, "If you insist, it's not impossible." Lu Shui understood and said, "I don't want to give up." The old scholar said, "You've already been expelled from Aoyama. There won't be any problem for you to join another sect. Moreover, do you really want to give up?" Lu Shui said, "If I want to resume my cultivation, I need to continue practicing the evil method. The old scholar said, "The cultivation method is just a saber. Whether the saber is used to kill people or to save people, it's all up to us." It's like when you defeated Jianruyun at the sword trial in Aoyama by using the fire of the devil pill and the secret method of the bloody demon church. Wasn't it because you thought he was a bad person? Using the cultivation techniques of the evil sects to do the right things. That is the right way of doing things. What he said was quite reasonable. Moreover, the example he gave was exactly what was in Lu Shisui's mind. But Lu Shisui still didn't agree to it. "It was that day that I found I wasn't sure if I could hold this saber." He continued, "If that's the case, I can't pick up this saber again." The old scholar understood what he meant, saying sentimentally, "That's amazing. If you had come to Yamatai directly, things wouldn't have been so troublesome." It was a quiet and sleepless night. Lu Shisui got up and pushed open the courtyard gate. A middle-aged man walked in, ignoring him. He looked around the courtyard with his hands clasped behind his back, looking extremely arrogant. Of course, he had the right to be arrogant. His energy was unfathomable, and his bearing was extraordinary. Lu Shisui was a bit sleepy. He yawned and asked, "Another person?" "Zhongzhou School, Wei Chenzi in the Yuanying realm," the middle-aged man said. Lu Shisui's sleepiness suddenly disappeared, and he was shocked speechless. The Yuanying state in the cultivation system of Zhaoga, which was headed by the Zhongzhou School, was equivalent to the upper state of the free travel in the Aoyama system. Wei Chenzi glanced at Lu Shisui and said, "The Aoyama sect is still so narrow-minded. It's not a big deal for someone of your caliber to eat a devil pill. Why do you want to be expelled from a sect?" Lu Shisui wanted to say, "Don't humiliate my sect," but he kept silent in the end. Wei Chenzi didn't beat around the bush and said directly, "You're not sure if you can hold this knife. What you're afraid of is the backlash of the evil method. It seems that you haven't had enough adventures. If you come with me, I'll teach you the method to help you guard your mind. Even if you can't, you can just commit suicide. If you have the courage to die, you won't have to worry about not being able to defeat yourself." Lu Shisui was silent for a while, and then he asked, "Who are you people?" It was impossible for the mysterious dark sect, Yamatai, and Zhongzhou School to appear in a small village at the same time. Especially the former was a famous evil sect, and the swordsmen in the Yuanying state in Zhongzhou School. How could they let the disciple of the mysterious dark sect live and communicate with each other? This could only mean that they were together. What kind of organization could have the swordsmen of these three sects working for them? The door of the courtyard was pushed open. The old scholar of Yamatai and the gloomy disciple of the mysterious dark sect walked in. "Have you ever heard of a place called Bustling?" Lu Shisui thought to himself, "They really came." He mumbled, "I really didn't expect this. Seniors, please take a seat. I'll go pour you a cup of tea." Having said this, he turned around and went into the kitchen. He picked up the cleaver, and without hesitation, he chopped at his own neck. A gust of chilly wind poured into the kitchen from the courtyard, sending him flying. He crashed heavily into the wall, and the cleaver fell to the ground, making a clanking sound. The disciple of the mysterious dark sect sneered, "Your reaction is quite fast." The old scholar took out a square handkerchief and handed it to him, indicating for him to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Wei Chenzi said, "The disciples of Aoyama have been taught by their teachers to be too pedantic. It's not like all the Bulo Lin are bad people." Lu Shisui refused the handkerchief and stood up with the support of the wall. He used his sleeve to wipe the blood and stared at Wei Chenzi, saying, "No, you are all bad people. The cultivation methods are all sabers, regardless of whether they are good or evil. Bulo Lin is also a saber." The old scholar said, gently while looking at him, "You can use this saber to do good deeds, like killing the treacherous chancellors in Zhaoga City, or those generals who are ready to surrender. If you kill a few more of these people, all the people in the world will thank you." Lu Shisui shook his head and said, "I don't believe there are any good people in Bulo Lin. Are all the people of Aoyama sect good people? If they are, how could you end up like this? There are also bad people in my Zhongzhou school." Wei Chenzi said, It's the same in Bulow Lin. There are good people and bad people, so the key is what kind of person you want to be. After a moment of silence, Lu Shui asked, "But how can you prove it?" The disciple of the mysterious dark sect grew impatient and said while staring at him, "If you don't come with us, I'll kill all the people in your village." Lu Shui looked at the old scholar and said, "I don't think such a person is qualified to do good deeds." The old scholar smiled faintly, not saying anything. Huh. Wei Chenzi's palm hit the head of the disciple of the mysterious dark sect. The head of the disciple of the mysterious dark sect split open like a ripe watermelon, but strangely, no blood came out. A band of black fog flew out from the head of the disciple of the mysterious dark sect, and a blurry face could be vaguely seen, hideous and frightened, fleeing toward the outside of the room. It was unclear when the old scholar had taken out a folding fan. He opened it with a swoosh and fanned it twice toward the band of black fog. Along with a despairing scream, the band of black fog was set ablaze, soon turning into a few wisps of green smoke. Soon after, the corpse of the disciple of the mysterious dark sect also turned into green smoke, disappearing without a trace. Chapter 111. Don't you want to prove it? I'll prove it to you. There are many people in Bulow Lin, and there are many sects, some good and some bad. Wei Chenzi looked at him expressionlessly and said, "You can stand on our side or die." They revealed their identities in front of Lu Shui. The elders of the Zhongzhou school in the Yuanying state and the seniors of Yamatai were all on the side of Bulow Lin. If Lu Shui didn't follow them, he would die. Only a dead man wouldn't reveal this secret. Lu Shui still didn't understand why they would suddenly attack the disciple of the mysterious dark sect. Was it to prove that there were good people in Bulow Lin? Our task was to bring you back, and you did it willingly, so we had no choice but to use this method to convince you. Wei Chenzi said, "Besides, it's our Zhongzhou school killing a demonic person. What's wrong with that?" Lu Shui said, "I don't think I'm that important." Wei Chenzi said, "You're a very talented person, able to enter the middle state of the golden pill at such a young age. You're one of the top 10 in all of Chaotian. If the Aoyama sect doesn't value you, other sects will. If those sects didn't want to offend the Aoyama sect, they would have come to see you." Lu Shui fell silent for a while, then said, "I need to think about it. You guys can come back tomorrow." Wei Chenzi said, "I know you're not afraid of death, but don't try to commit suicide. Otherwise, the whole of your village will die with you, including your parents." Lu Shui stared into his eyes and said, "What those good and bad people said were all lies. Those are the reasons you want to hear and the excuses you need. Regardless of whether they're true or not, all you have to do is ask yourself one question: am I willing to die?" Having said that, Wei Chenzi and the old scholar turned around and left. It was late at night, and the stars were bright. Lu Shui looked outside the window in silence, wondering if he was asking himself that question. Suddenly, he got up and walked to the next room. Mother Lu grabbed his hand, not knowing what to say. Father Lu sighed. He took out a small box from the deepest part of the cabinet and handed it to him. Lu Shui took the box, opened it, and found a jasmine flower inside. This jasmine flower should have been sealed with a Taoist technique. It was still as white and tender as before. Ninth Young Master left this here more than a year ago. Father Lu said to him, he said that if you still want to leave, remember to give this to you. Lu Shui didn't know what that meant. Lu's mother picked up the jasmine flower and used a needle and thread to sew it on his lapel. It looked very nice. Note, the villagers knew that Lu Shui had disappeared from the small mountain village, but no one in the outside world cared. The most important thing in Chaotian right now was the plum meeting that would take place in a few days. Many cultivation practitioners had already left for Zhaoga City. Dozens of sword lights appeared in the blue sky, creating a spectacular scene. The scene of the immortal masters of Aoyama traveling together had become a popular scene in southern land. If the weather was good enough, some lucky populace would be able to witness such a scene, which would become a topic of conversation for them in the future. Chaonan City received the news and adjusted the formation as quickly as possible. They didn't start setting it up again until the dozens of sword lights landed in the city. Nanhezu was the traditional territory of the sword sect of Aoyama, so the masters and disciples of Aoyama didn't need to stay in the immortal houses like other cultivation practitioners. As the largest auction house in Nanhezu, the Precious Tree House would earn a large amount of crystals and gold and silver every day, but it had been closed since the day before yesterday. The owner of the building personally commanded dozens of caretakers and servants to clean the 9 floors, ensuring that there was no dust at all. The 9th floor was divided into 2 rooms, one for the leader of the group, the Peak Master of Qingrong, and the other for Zhao Liu. The owner of the Precious Tree House wasn't qualified to meet the 2 Peak Masters, so he only hoped that one of them wouldn't remember the cold reception he had received here. The mysterious room C on the 7th floor didn't look like a cold reception, but the caretaker didn't know that the girl with the gray cloth covering her face was the rumored Zhao Liu. The Precious Tree House didn't dare neglect the service of the Peak Master of Qingrong, but the disciples of Aoyama, attending the plum meeting and accompanying them, could sense that the attitude of the Precious Tree House toward Zhao Liu was especially respectful, in addition to a hint of fear and a clear intention to flatter her. Yao Songzhan was one of the 10 disciples selected in the sword trial of Aoyama last year. He had been practicing the sword work on Shangda Peak before he went to Liangwang Peak, so he didn't understand the reason. He didn't understand the reason until he heard the explanation from the disciples of Shilai Peak and Shuriwa Peak. The Precious Tree House was a peripheral business of the Aoyama sect, so it earned a great amount of crystals and silver from the auction, but it was nothing for the Aoyama sect. What the Aoyama sect really cared about was the magic pills and materials distributed by the Imperial Court and the Union of Sects, as well as the resources needed for cultivation, which were now transported into Aoyama by the Precious Tree House. The former Peak Master of Bihu, Lei Poyan, had been dead for many years, so the so-called legacy, or the affection, had disappeared a long time ago. As such, the Precious Tree House was worried about being disqualified. Yao Songzhan asked confusedly, Shenma Peak has just been established, and Aoyama doesn't even participate in the meetings. Why would they care about these trivial matters? Why doesn't the Precious Tree House ask the masters of other peaks for help? The disciple of Shilai Peak said, You know that Shenma Peak has just been established. Besides Shenma Peak, all the other peaks have their own businesses. Why should the Precious Tree House continue to do the most lucrative business? The Precious Tree House's intention is clear. They want to change their sect and join Shenma Peak directly. Yao Songzhan raised his eyebrows slightly and said, I think it's useless. Young Senior Master Zhao won't pay attention to them. The disciple of Shuriwa Peak laughed and said, Of course young Senior Master Zhao won't pay attention to them. The Precious Tree House can't climb to Shenma Peak anyway. But don't forget that young Senior Master Zhao's home is in Zhaoga City, so it's not difficult to find her. I heard that the Precious Tree House sent dozens of carriages of good stuff to Zhaoga City last winter. Yao Songzhan was speechless for a while and said, Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's take the time to cultivate. The plum meeting was not far away, so it would be a good thing to improve one's cultivation state on the way. The disciple of Shuriwa Peak and the disciple of Shilai Peak eyed each other and shook their heads with a bitter smile, lacking any confidence in themselves. The disciples of the Aoyama sect participating in the plum meeting this year were the weakest in hundreds of years in many people's eyes. Zhui was still behind closed doors, so the disciples of Aoyama participating in the plum meeting were of course led by Guanan Shan. This principal disciple of the sect master had indeed displayed a cultivation state superior to his peers at the sword trial in Aoyama, and had advanced to the free travel state after a long period of preparation. According to many people's calculations, if Tong Yin hadn't had any special encounters in the last few years, Guanan Shan would have been able to defeat her, and he might even have had the chance to challenge Lo Huainan. As a result, his sword was broken. He had no choice but to stay on Yunxing Peak to continue practicing his sword, and it was unclear when he would be able to leave the mountain. Besides Guanan Shan, Guhan was still recuperating from his wounds, and so was Jian Ruyun. After careful calculation, the strongest disciples of Liangwang Peak couldn't participate in the plum meeting this time. It was all because of that person. The disciple of Shalai Peak asked, "Why can't he come with us?" The disciple of Shuriwet Peak replied with a slight, mocking tone, "Because he is the senior master." Jingjiu didn't ride on his sword. He didn't walk out of Aoyama until it was dark, arriving in Cloudy Town. Like last time when he walked out of Aoyama, he went to a restaurant and ordered a hot pot. This time he didn't order a double-flavor hot pot. He ordered a large pot of white soup and cooked a piece of green vegetable. No restaurant would welcome such a guest, but the guest who took out a golden leaf in advance was an exception. Chapter 112. After finishing the pot of soup, Jingjiu put on his conical hat, fastened his sash, and left the restaurant. He entered the carriage. This car was prepared by the Gu family in advance. The Gu clan was a large clan in Nanhezu. Many of their disciples were cultivating in Aoyama, and 2 elders were cultivating on Tianguang Peak and Shuriwet Peak respectively. As his disciple, how could Gu Qing let Jingjiu worry about such a trivial matter? He had already made arrangements. Over the past year, Gu Qing's status in the family had undergone many subtle changes. No matter how one looked at it, the first disciple of Shima Peak seemed to have a bright future. Although it was not as high as Gu Han's position in Aoyama, who knew what would happen in the future. Naturally, a big family would not make a mistake in such matters. The carriage was large and luxuriously decorated. The Gu family must have put a lot of effort into this carriage. Jingjiu did not understand this, but he was very satisfied. Because there was a bed in the carriage, there was even a window at the top, which was inlaid with a whole piece of glass, allowing sunlight to pass through. He untied the iron sword wrapped in cloth, lay down on the bed, and knocked on the carriage. The sound of horse hooves could be heard as the carriage headed out of Cloudy Town. Clouds gathered from all directions and floated past the window. He looked at the scenery on the window in silence. He didn't go with the group of Aoyama, not only because he didn't want to be too close to that person on Qingrong Peak, but also for another reason. Some time ago, a treasure light suddenly shot out from the Rogue Mountain in the north of the South River State, illuminating the night sky. That was the sign of a supreme Dharma treasure appearing. There were even cultivators who said that there was a cave left behind by a previous spiritual master. Due to the changes in the aura of heaven and earth, it was about to be reopened. This kind of rumor would appear every once in a while in Chaotian, but it didn't attract much attention from the cultivation sections. Those cultivation sects who were qualified to participate in the plum meeting didn't send their disciples to the plum meeting, and the Aoyama sect didn't pay any attention to it, even in Nanhezu. Of course, Jingjiu knew that this rumor was false. This was because the legendary perfected person of the previous generation was called Jingyang. However, he would still go and take a look because many disciples from small sects and rogue cultivators would go. He wanted to see if that guy would appear. That guy loved to watch a good show. Back then, the 2 of them made this fake abode because that fellow was playful and liked to watch the fun, right? One evening, the carriage stopped at the south side of the Rogue Mountain. Jingjiu came down with the iron sword on his back, turning his head around to take a look at the carriage. He felt that this carriage was really comfortable. Cultivators would not get carsick, and moving up and down with the carriage could actually help him sleep. He thought, and said to the carriage. He said to the carriage. He said to the carriage. The coachman didn't even dare to make a sound as he nodded desperately. The twilight deepened, and the mountains grew darker. Occasionally, a sword light could be seen. There were indeed no high-level cultivators among the treasure hunters. He walked, Jingjiu, and came in before Aeon, he mountain sect, and came to see Jingjiu of Jing Mountain. On Jing Sect Mountain Cave, and came. If Qi and the Manor clan were, they would, they insect, and of would before, they would, and would. Shan one was. Mountain was the manor was Ten Shan Mountain. A cave, it was not a formation. Instead, it was a custom of the southern continent. He asked Gu Qing about it before he left. This rule was obviously copied from the Green Mountain sect, but it was a bit odd. Jingjiu walked into the temple. A fire was burning in the temple. A dozen cultivators sat around the fire. Cultivators were not afraid of cold or heat. They had better eyesight. They didn't need light to walk at night, but they still had a fire. No one liked to be alone. The fire was assigned to call for companions. Being together would give people courage. The light of the fire illuminated their faces, and the flames moved with the wind, made their expressions a little uncertain. They should still be hesitating whether they should go a few more miles forward before the cave residence opened at midnight. The problem was that they would inevitably be entangled and fought with their competitors. If the cave residence was fake, wouldn't it be a loss? A dozen gazes fell on Jingjiu. Jingjiu ignored them. He went to a corner and sat down. He didn't need companions. He was used to being alone. It was quiet in the temple. Only the sound of the fire moving in the wind could be heard. After an unknown period of time, an extremely loud and clear voice came from outside the temple, diluting the tense and oppressive feeling brought about by the darkness of the ruined temple. This can't be real. How could they think of something like that? What enlightened Jingyang's manner? This is Nanhezu. If it was enlightened Jingyang's manner, how could the Aoyama sect let anyone near it? Even Zhongzhou school could only stay away from it. Only these idiots would believe it. Two monks walked into the temple. One was old, and the other was young. The one who spoke was the young one. More than 10 cultivators glared at the young monk. The young monk was careless. He didn't notice the fire. He didn't expect that there were people in the temple. He was stunned. Those idiots should be them, right? The young monk felt very embarrassed that he had been speaking ill of someone behind their back. He bowed and apologized profusely. The 10+ cultivators were both angry and helpless because the young monk's apology was extremely sincere indeed. Most importantly, he and the old monk carried old wooden drawers on their backs and were dressed like ascetic cultivators. Their origins were obvious with a single glance, so how could they afford to offend them? They heard that the monks of Guocheng Temple had good tempers. They could vent their anger by scolding them, but what was the point? No one dared to do anything. They accepted the young monk's apology and stood up to greet the old monk. They even offered the best spot by the fire. The young monk suddenly saw Jingjiu wearing the conical hat in the corner. He hesitated a bit and couldn't help but let out an ah after looking at Jingjiu a few more times. The old monk said helplessly, "What's wrong?" Oh. The young monk thought that Jingjiu wanted to hide his identity, so he couldn't point him out. He said to the old monk anxiously, "Senior Master, you're right. I was wrong." He thought that since the Aoyama sect sent Jingjiu from Shinma Peak, the manor cave open tonight must have some background, even if it wasn't the manor cave of immortal Jingyang. Jingjiu had seen the young monk twice, but he didn't expect him to be so talkative. He was even more talkative than Shui. Jingjiu might have been annoyed by him in the past, but now he felt close to him. He smiled at the young monk. The fire illuminated a corner of the bamboo hat. The young monk covered his chest with his hand, thinking that it was as beautiful as the rumors said. "Senior Brother Jing." "No, Senior Master Jing. Why are you here? Is it the manor cave tonight?" His voice was so low that other cultivators in the temple didn't notice. Jingjiu shook his head. The young monk was about to say something else. The old monk came over and said, "Shut up." The young monk sighed and closed his mouth, thinking that he and this senior master of Aoyama had some conflicts. Every time they met, he was forced to practice the vow of silence. Seeing this, Jingjiu wondered if he should learn the vow of silence and teach it to Shui 2 years later. Chapter 113. Jingjiu gestured for the old monk to sit down. The old monk whispered a few words of explanation. It turned out that the Guocheng Temple had heard of this matter and was worried that cultivators would fight over the treasures, resulting in too many casualties. So, they sent them over so that it would be convenient to treat them at any time. Jingjiu thought it was normal because this was the style of the Guocheng Temple. If one was new to them, they might think that these doctor monks were too pedantic, vain, and even pretentious. But the Guoqing Temple had been pretentious for thousands of years, so it was bound to gain the respect of the entire world, including the underworld. "What about you?" the old monk asked. Jingjiu said, "I just wanted to take a look. It's not real. It's just a prank." The old monk understood that this kind of thing had often happened in the past. In the past, before some of the great cultivators ascended or disappeared, they liked to make some fake abodes to joke with the younger generation. The old monk said in confusion, "But the immortal Jingyang is not like this." But the other immortal liked it. Jingjiu thought. The mountain wind suddenly picked up, and the bonfire in the temple was blown away. A dozen cultivators stood up and rushed out of the temple, looking at a certain place in the mountains. Under the night sky, there was a faint glow of treasures that flashed like water, and there was a wind blowing from the other side. "The abode is about to open. I'll go first." There were still a few cultivators who could not resist and rushed into the area 20 miles away from the abode before it opened. As several sword lights illuminated the night sky, more cultivators appeared in the surrounding mountains. Jingjiu flew up with the wind and landed on the top of a tree. He looked into the distance in silence. That was what that person had said in that cliff more than 20 li away. If those greedy idiots found out that there were no treasures in the abode, only a piece of white paper, would they die of anger? After saying this, that person laughed happily, and his laughter echoed among the peaks. Countless years later, that laughter seemed to still be echoing here. The expression in Jingjiu's eyes suddenly became as sharp as a real sword. He fell from the treetop, as silent as a falling leaf, and slipped into the night. It didn't take long for him to appear on the cliff more than 10 kilometers away. He believed that he didn't make any sound. Even the disturbance to the wind was minimal. If there was someone here just now, they shouldn't have been alarmed by him. Both of them had to start from scratch. He didn't believe that the other party's realm was any higher than his. He was somewhat disappointed. There was no one on the cliff. After an unknown period of time, the valley at the bottom of the cliff became lively. Dozens of cultivators gathered here, and the sounds of argument grew louder and louder. The cave residence had not been completely opened, but these rogue cultivators and cultivators from small sects could not wait any longer. They began to discuss how to divide the treasures later, but they could not come up with a plan that everyone was satisfied with. The young monk of the Guoqing Temple sensed that the atmosphere was getting tenser and tenser. He was a little worried and wanted to say a few words, but he couldn't because of the silent meditation. He was very anxious. The old monk had seen many similar scenes and knew that it was impossible to dissuade these people. He closed his eyes and began to rest. Later, these cultivators would definitely start killing each other. It would be fine if they died directly, but it would take a lot of effort to heal those with broken arms and torn abdomens. The old monk suddenly opened his eyes and looked up at the night sky. He sensed the familiar aura and thought with relief that nothing would happen tonight. The arguing in the valley gradually quieted down. More and more cultivators sensed the aura coming from the night sky and looked up in shock. An auspicious cloud floated over from the southeast. In it, there was an extremely large lotus throne vaguely visible, emitting a peaceful Zen aura. "Zen Master's golden body," the cultivators exclaimed. They quickly tidied up their clothes and bowed to the sky. They were all bowing to the juniors. The Zen Master of the Guoqing Temple was one of the few people with the highest seniority in the cultivation world. Jingjiu looked at the night sky and revealed a smile. He thought that he should have known that the little monk would come to take a look. The little monk was the only one in the world who knew about this story. A voice came from the depths of the auspicious cloud and fell with the wind, falling into everyone's ears. "This place is a joke made by Taiping Jinren and immortal Jingyang. There are no real treasures here. Everyone, please disperse." Zen Master's voice was very clear and gentle, like sweet dew. It was hard to tell how old he was, but felt unreal. The cultivators on the ground all acknowledged and scattered around the mountain. The reason they were so obedient was naturally because of Zen Master's prestige. The monks of the Guoqing Temple would never lie. Moreover, Everyone knew that immortal Jingyang had no friends. Only Zen Master had once sought Tao for 100 days at the peak of Shinma Peak. They could be considered close, so his words were naturally trustworthy. The old and young monks stood up and bowed to the auspicious cloud. Zen Master's voice disappeared for a while and then sounded again. Martial nephew, Mo Xiangbei. The old monk's expression changed slightly. He lowered his head and responded. Jingjiu did not look at the auspicious cloud in the night sky. Instead, he looked at a certain place below the cliff. There was an old man dressed in black. He looked ordinary, but he bowed along with the cultivators around him. In the 9 peaks of Aoyama, there was a ghost in everyone's heart. Jingjiu did not expect to not see the biggest ghost, but the most unlikely one. The master of Shilai Peak had actually come in person. If not for the others' reaction when Zen Master appeared, he would not have noticed. Why did the master of Shilai Peak come? Because he had also participated in that incident 7 years ago. If he did not confirm it with his own eyes, he would not be at ease. In the next moment, Jingjiu was alarmed. He wanted to look away, but it was already too late. The master of Shilai Peak raised his head and glanced at him. His expression was indifferent, as if he did not discover his identity. Jingjiu knew that the other sword awareness had already landed on him. Unless he could create enough distance, he would not be able to erase it. If he left like this, the other could use the sword awareness to find him at any time and kill him with one strike. Jingjiu turned and left without hesitation. He followed the slope of the cliff and came to the bottom of the auspicious cloud. The stars were very bright tonight, and the shadows of the auspicious cloud were very clear. The auspicious cloud floated toward the north. He floated forward in the shadow of the mountains and rivers. He still did not ride on his sword. It was unknown whether the auspicious cloud was too slow or he was too fast. In any case, the two of them were always together. The master of Shilai Peak came to the cliff. He looked over there in silence. In the end, he did not do anything. He turned into a sword light and returned to Aoyama. Jingjiu and the cloud traveled for hundreds of miles and left Nanhezu. The auspicious cloud suddenly sped up and turned into a stream of light, flying toward Jiaoga City in the far north. Only the voice of Zen Master echoed between heaven and earth. Young friend, I will see you off here. Goodbye. Jingjiu knew that there were many people on the auspicious cloud. He did not want to go over and meet the other. The child who used to talk casually was now high and mighty. He even needed to ask for protection from the other. If it were someone else in his current situation, he would be a bit depressed, or at least not used to it. Jingjiu was fine, but he could not help but complain when he heard the last sentence. Young friend. Chapter 114. The Jing imperial court didn't have a king with a different surname, and the state dukes were the most respected. Currently, there were a total of 27 dukes in the imperial court. Naturally, their ancestors had made great contributions to the imperial court. However, as time passed, the contributions of the past would gradually fade. Some dukes no longer had any real power in their hands and were gradually marginalized. In a few years, they would probably become mere decorations. As the study companion of the emperor when he was young, State Duke, he didn't have to worry about this, even though he didn't keep a low profile like State Duke Lu did. Though State Duke, he didn't keep a low profile like State Duke Lu, he at least didn't have to worry about this. He was still favored by the emperor, and the most obvious proof was that he was the one sitting in the drizzle at the Net Perception Temple. The Net Perception Temple was a side courtyard of the royal palace, and also the private temple of the Jing imperial court. He wasn't here to pray for blessings on behalf of the emperor, but to entertain an important guest on behalf of the emperor. He wasn't worried about his power and status, but he was worried that he wouldn't be able to get up tomorrow if he sat on the damp and cold floor for too long. He hadn't sat on a futon for many years. If he hadn't had the experience of sitting on it when he was studying in Yamatai, he thought he would have fallen down at any moment. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but complain about this important guest. Then he thought of the rumored heart-reading magic of this guest, feeling a bit nervous. He recited a few Buddhist mantras in silence, and put on a smile on his face. He looked at the deep end of the meditation room, covered by layers of curtains and white smoke, expressing his gratitude again. Zen Master is willing to come here with the Lotus Carriage to help your Majesty with the questions regarding the Buddhist methods, and he is willing to host the plum meeting in person. This is indeed an honor for the imperial court. A gentle breeze blew over, taking away the remaining fragrance in the meditation room. It was unclear how Zen Master would react after hearing these words. The highly achieved monks of the Guoqing Temple and the Duke of He were exchanging pleasantries with each other, talking nonsense that had to be finished. Looking at the deep end of the meditation room, the Duke of He asked after a moment of hesitation, "I heard that someone from the Aoyama sect went there last night. Is that really the second manor house of the immortal Jingyang?" The opening of the cave abode in Rogue Mountain couldn't be hidden from the imperial court. However, just like many large cultivation sects, the imperial court also thought it was fake and didn't send anyone to investigate. But this morning, some obscure news had spread. The Guoqing Temple had no intention of hiding it. That was just a joke the two spiritual masters made back then. Zen Master's voice was clear and ordinary, but it was enough to make those who heard it feel deep veneration. Who else in this world had the right to tell the story of the two enlightened masters of Aoyama's sect in such a calm tone? The Duke of He pretended to be surprised and asked, "What about the person under the cloud?" Zen Master said, "It should be the descendant of an old friend, so I came to take a look." The Duke of He thought that among all the 9 peaks of Aoyama, the descendant of his old friend should be a disciple on the Shinma Peak, so it must have something to do with the immortal Jingyang. Since the Zen Master had confirmed that the cave abode was not the manor house of the immortal Jingyang, he didn't think too much about it, saying casually, "I don't think there are any outstanding disciples of Aoyama participating in this year's plum meeting, so it's a pity. I wonder when the personal disciple of the sect master of Aoyama will come out." Compared to Lo Huainan by Zhao, Tong Yin, and Tong Lu of Zhongzhou School, who were well-known young geniuses, the disciples of the 3rd generation of Aoyama, without Guanan Shan, Guhan, and Jian Ruyun, looked a bit shabby. Though it was said that Zhao Leu would come, she was still young and had a special identity. An old monk of the Guoqing Temple asked mildly, "Isn't there another Jingjiu?" The Duke of He didn't notice that the old monk glanced at the deep end of the meditation room before saying this, saying with a smile, "I heard that this disciple performed well in the sword trial of Aoyama, but he can't compare to the likes of Lo Huainan and Bai Zhao. More importantly, he will participate in the chess tournament to challenge Tong Yin. It's really interesting." It was quiet in the meditation room. Nobody laughed with him. It was a boring scene. The Duke of He laughed twice awkwardly, and then thought of another important matter. He said after some hesitation, "The royal concubine is outside the temple and wants to receive your blessing." This meant that she wanted to see him. A few old monks of the Guoqing Temple and the headmaster of the Net Perception Temple looked at the deep end of the meditation room. The white smoke was lingering in the air, but Zen Master couldn't be seen. After a moment of silence, the voice of Zen Master broke out again. "It was out of mercy and fate that I let her live back then. She is already blessed today. Why should I covet more? Let's meet again if fate permits." The Duke of He understood what he meant and didn't dare say anything more. There was a forest of locust trees outside the Net Perception Temple, with a few carriages parked in the forest. They looked plain and low-key, but the number of guards around them indicated that the people in the carriages were of high status. The light wind and the drizzle fell down. Though it was late spring, it still felt chilly. A eunuch walked out of the carriage and motioned for the guards to return to the carriage to take shelter from the rain. This was the Net Perception Temple, and there were dozens of highly achieved monks of the Guoqing Temple in the temple, so there was no need to be so careful. The royal concubine is so kind that she even cares about such trifles. A maidservant in the carriage said in an obsequious manner. A beautiful woman sat by the window. She had a beautiful face, and her eyes exuded a sense of charm, but she also gave off a feeling of naivety, an irresistible allure for men. She was the most favored royal concubine who in the palace. I came from a poor family, so I know how it feels to be drenched in the rain in the wilderness. If Zhu Gui hadn't been kind enough to save my life from that free-traveling practitioner, I would have been dead a long time ago. Royal concubine who showed a hint of sadness on her face. Thinking of what the Duke of he had asked her attendant to tell him, she said through gritted teeth, "I don't care if he doesn't want to see me. I don't believe there will be less." She was about to say some harsh words, but she was afraid that the people in the temple would hear her. Besides, she respected Zen Master, so she changed her words to something else. "I don't believe that no one can help me vent my anger." The maidservant rolled her eyes and said, "Should we ask the Zhongzhou school to help us?" Few people knew that royal concubine who was close to the Zhongzhou school. Last year, when the Western Sea Sword School held the Four Seas banquet, the Zhongzhou school made an exception and sent a disciple named Xiang Wanshu to the banquet. It was because of her influence. Hearing this, royal concubine who didn't feel pleased, but her expression turned cold, saying sternly, "If you say such things again in the future, you'd better get out of the palace." The maidservant knelt down and begged for mercy for no apparent reason. Royal concubine, who was a smart person. She knew that she could try to ask the Zen master help her, but she couldn't ask the Zhongzhou school to help her because the Guocheng temple had a close relationship with the Aoyama sect, and the Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect had been at loggerheads for many years. They didn't like each other, not to mention that they were like fire and water. The orthodox cultivation sects were the foundation of the human imperial court. If she tried to pick a fight with them because of her, or even cause some trouble, even the empress would be deposed and banished to the cold palace, to say nothing of a royal concubine who had been favored by the emperor for a few years. A palace servant girl said softly, "Master Sure said a few days ago that the Pure Heaven Bureau has been keeping an eye on the Aoyama sect." Royal concubine who said angrily, "The Pure Heaven Bureau wouldn't dare do anything to the Aoyama sect. She is the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang. I just want her to apologize, but I can't do that. I heard that Jing Jiao wants to challenge Tong Yin shamelessly. I'd like to see how he will deal with it." Zhaoga City was enshrouded in the drizzle. The people lining up outside the city gate to enter the city had already put on their conical hats. Jing Jiao was no longer eye-catching. The city guard took the slightly wet travel permit from Jing Jiao and asked, "Where are you from? What are you doing in Zhaoga City?" "Going home," replied Jing Jiao. According to the investigation of Shanghai Peak, Jing Jiao, a disciple of the Aoyama sect, lived in Zhaoga City. In fact, his home was indeed in Zhaoga City. He returned to Zhaoga City after 20 years, but he felt less sentimental than last time. Last time in Zhaoga City, he was greeted by the winter snow, and this time he was greeted by the spring rain. He had learned a saying in the small village. The spring rain was as precious as oil. For the people living in Zhaoga City, the spring rain was like oil, making the green stone slabs slippery and extremely annoying. Of course, the spring rain would also attract many poems from the poets. Jing Jiao wasn't interested in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, so he didn't know how to write poems. But he liked the spring rain. He liked the spring rain falling on the boat with the black awning on the eaves and on the conical hat. It was like when he moved into the room and slept with the window open on a snowy day. In a sense, he lived a poetic life, though he didn't realize it. Walking in the streets and alleys of Zhaoga City with the conical hat on, Jing Jiao didn't pay attention to the ubiquitous energy of the formations, gazing at other places through the drizzle. For instance, the soup bowls of the beggars under the eaves rippled by the drizzle. For instance, a young woman on the boat with the black awning fanned the fire of a small clay stove while preparing the dishes for the boat. For instance, a girl who forgot to bring an umbrella ran past at the entrance of the alley, her hair full of pearl-like raindrops. There was a quiet small courtyard in the deep end of the alley, and one could see the eaves of Taichung Temple not far away. Shangda Peak had investigated thoroughly and found that Jing Jiao's ancestor had served the divine emperor of the previous generation. As such, it was a matter of course that his home was here. The wooden gate of the courtyard was old, and the moss on both ends of the stone steps was wet by the rainwater. Everything looked so peaceful. Chapter 115. Jingjiao did not knock on the door. He pushed a black brick half an inch into the wall. It was a mechanism. The sound of something hard rolling came from behind the door. He could not see through the wooden door, but he knew it was a smooth stone ball moving along a fixed track. It would fall after a long distance and break a large porcelain bowl. After a long time, the wooden door did not open. He stood on the stone steps and waited. His expression was calm, as usual. The rain was getting heavier. It fell on the bamboo hat and dripped down from the edge like a waterfall during a dry season. Because of the rain, the people outside the alley were walking in a hurry. No one noticed him. With a light sound, the courtyard door finally opened. An old man appeared. The old man had a square face with straight eyebrows and bright eyes. His cheeks were slightly red. It was unclear whether it was because he had drunk alcohol or was a bit excited. He wore a gray, unlined garment, and the buttons on the garment weren't fastened. It looked like he had put it on in a hurry. The expression in his eyes, while looking at Jingjiao, was full of suspicion and scrutiny. Jingjiao took out a wooden plate and handed it over. The old man did not dare to take it. He bent down and looked at it carefully for a long time. When he was sure it was the real thing, he knelt down without hesitation. He did not care that the ground was wet with rain. "Get up," Jingjiao said. The old man got up and respectfully welcomed him into the courtyard. He walked along the side corridor. There were people in the courtyard. To be exact, there was a family. In the open parlor, the family was eating. There were old and young, men and women, and they all sat neatly together. The family's eyes were on the table. They were talking in low voices. It seemed that they did not see Jingjiao and the old man. This scene was a little strange. The 3 or 4 years old child suddenly broke free from his mother's arms. He ran to the threshold and looked at Jingjiao curiously. He stretched out his hand to say something, but his father quickly took him back. The child cried in the parlor. In the corridor, Jingjiao took off his bamboo hat and looked in that direction. The child saw his face and could not help but be stunned. He forgot to cry. "Is this the Jing family?" "Yes, they've been working for Taichung Temple for generations. They can be considered my family subjects." The square-faced elder glanced at Jingjiao and said, "I can assure you that they don't know anything, but they will never forget what they should remember." Jingjiao understood that those people were his nominal parents, his old grandfather, and his brother and sister-in-law. As for whether the child was his nephew or niece, this was all arranged back then. He was not good at it, but there were many people in the imperial court who were good at it. He sat on the chair and asked, "How many people have come to investigate over the years?" The old man stood in front of him and said, 7 years ago, the Aoyama sect Shanghai Peak came to investigate. According to their methods, they should be able to find some problems. Therefore, I immediately tried to remedy the situation. However, the strange thing is that they never came again. This has been making me feel uneasy." Jingjiao naturally knew why Shanghai Peak didn't continue to investigate, so he said, "Don't worry about that. There were 2 more major disturbances for years ago and 1 year ago." The old man said, 21 sects in total sent people to investigate, including royal concubine who in the imperial palace. 4 years ago, Zhao Leiyu and Jingjiao inherited the sword of the Shenma Peak, shocking the cultivation world. Most of the cultivation sects paid attention to Zhao Leiyu, but they would also investigate Jingjiao. 1 year ago, it was the Four Seas banquet held by the Western Sea Sword School and the sword trial held by Aoyama. Jingjiao defeated Guhan and broke Guananshan's sword. As a result, the master of Aoyama deliberately kept a low profile and turned Jingjiao into a surprise soldier failed. As the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang and a true genius in sword work, how could he not attract attention? The old man knew all this, so he knew this young man was Jingjiao. The Jing family had moved to this small courtyard for 20 years just for this young man. "I'm here to attend the plum meeting, so I'll stay here for the time being." Jingjiao said, "You send a letter to the Zhao Manor house and inform them." The old man knew his identity, so he knew where the Zhao Manor house was. Seeing Jingjiao had no other orders, he left through the secret passage behind the house. This secret passage led to another courtyard 100 feet away. That courtyard occupied a large area, with richly ornamented beams and painted rafters. The luxuries hidden in the depths of the courtyard were everywhere. The old man sat in the study room and did not say a word. He did not recover for a long time. Many years ago, his father had earnestly explained to him that the reason why the family could continue to this day and still maintain its glory was that they had done two things. One was to unconditionally support His Majesty the Divine Emperor, and the other was to absolutely obey the orders of the owner of the wooden token. What if the two things conflicted? He couldn't help but ask his father. His father said that the will of the emperor and the owner of the wooden board must be the same. The young man was a bit stubborn, but he persisted in asking, "What if?" He remembered clearly that his father had remained silent for a long time, and the answer he gave was the latter. He was shocked at the time, and it was still the same today. He didn't dare and didn't want to erase this cloud that had been hanging over the family for hundreds of years, but he couldn't help but be curious. Unfortunately, when he arranged that small courtyard 20 years ago, he only received a letter. In the letter, he saw the symbol of the wooden board and a few simple requirements, but he still didn't know who the owner of the wooden board was. It wasn't until recent years, when people from the cultivation sects and even the imperial palace began to pay attention to that small courtyard, that he learned the identity of the owner of the wooden board. He even used his influence to investigate it secretly, but he still couldn't be sure. It was because Jingjio was too young. Even if he was a genius in swordsmanship, he couldn't match the value of that wooden board. Jingjio should be the inheritor of that wooden board. As the old man was thinking about these things, the housekeeper reminded him in a low voice outside the window. "Master, it's almost past time." The spring rain was continuous, but the two barriers formed by the tactical matrix and the colored glass prevented the guests in the courtyard from getting wet. Instead, it added a bit of elegance. However, as time passed, the atmosphere in the courtyard became a bit strange, and the sound of the rain was gradually replaced by the sound of discussion. In the middle of the wedding, there was suddenly the sound of bowls being smashed, and the host left in a hurry. After such a long time, he didn't come out, as if he had disappeared. What was going on? What on earth happened? I heard that the old master was very mischievous when he was young. Could it be that he's back to his old ways? The old master loves his youngest son the most. Why would he do such a thing in his marriage? Don't talk nonsense. Everyone says that the old master is muddle-headed and unwilling to get close to the nobles in the imperial palace. But no matter what happened these years, this house has always been stable, and it still sits in the position of Taichung Temple. It's incomparably noble. This is what it means to be favored by the emperor. Can a muddle-headed person do this? But the auspicious hour is about to pass. As the guests were talking, they suddenly heard a sound of footsteps in front of them. Everyone looked up and quickly stopped talking. With solemn expressions, they bowed together. "Nice to meet you, Duke Liu. Sorry, there's something urgent." Duke Liu had a square face and an extraordinary bearing. Even when he was explaining, he had his own dignity. He didn't look like the humble and courteous old man in front of Jingjio, who looked like a housekeeper. Today was the day of the marriage between the youngest son of Duke Liu and the granddaughter of the prime minister. Halfway through the ceremony, Duke Liu suddenly disappeared and only reappeared now. No one in the courtyard dared to ask. Chapter 116. The red candlelight was on the table. 2 lines of tears ran down the bride's face, and the thick powder on her face was washed out with 2 obvious marks. Before marrying into the house of Duke, she had heard that the old Duke's temperament was a bit strange, but she still did not expect it to be so serious. Not only did he suddenly disappear during the ceremony, but he actually called the groom away on his wedding night. Was he not satisfied with her, or did he have a conflict with her grandfather? If so, why did he agree to this marriage? Dearcry did not know what his newly married wife was thinking in the bridal room. As the youngest son of Duke Liu, compared to his reputation of being a playboy, he was more calm and observant. He knew that his father must have a very important thing to tell him, and he had already noticed something strange in the room. This was Duke Liu's bedroom. On the shelf next to the window, there had always been a very expensive porcelain. It was said that the big bowl was from the Rue kiln 1,000 years ago. He had been warned not to touch it when he was young. He had a very deep impression of that porcelain bowl. Why did it change to a new one today? I was in a hurry today, so I just took a random one. Tomorrow go to the storeroom and bring the big bowl from the Xian kiln and put it here. Duke Lu was wearing plain clothes. He used his hand to comb his gray hair and repeatedly reminded, "Don't forget." Dear Cry responded and asked, "Father, what happened?" Duke Lu looked up at him and said, "They say that I love you the most. This is true. I even prepared to give the position of Duke to you." Although he had some guesses in the past few years, hearing this suddenly, Dear Cry could not help but be a little surprised. He said, "Then my two brothers." Duke Lu raised his hand to stop him and said, "Outsiders think that I am old and stupid. I only care about my youngest son. How would they know that I like your calmness?" Dear Cry did not know how to respond. But if you want to get the position of Duke, then there are some secrets in the family that you also have to bear. After saying this, Duke Lu looked a little tired, but also a little relaxed. He said with a smile, "I also learned this secret from my father on the night of my wedding. Your aunt complained about me for many years. When you go back later, don't forget to coax your new wife." Lu Ming became more and more nervous and asked, "Father, what is the secret?" Duke Lu's gaze fell on the shelf, and he said quietly, "The secret has to start from this bowl." The furnishings in the room were very simple, and it seemed very quiet. There were no treasures on the shelf next to the window. It was mainly made of ink and yellow stones, and it was very suitable for cultivators. Jingjiu was very satisfied. He took out a bamboo chair and lay down on it. He did not forget about this matter when he left Aoyama. Accompanied by the sound of rain outside the window, he fell asleep very comfortably. When he woke up, the rain had not stopped, and it was already evening. He thought for a moment and walked out of the room. He walked along the long corridor to the front yard and entered the reception hall. The family was still sitting in the reception hall. Even their seats had not changed, but the dishes on the table had been put away. With his arrival, the atmosphere in the parlor suddenly became tense. The young woman uneasily held the child in her arms. Several gazes fell on him. People didn't know whether they should get up to greet him or what they should do. Jingjiu asked, "Can I sit here for a while?" The middle-aged man quickly got up and said, "Sit, sit, sit." He wanted to ask him to sit, but thinking of the adult's orders and the years of practice, he forcibly swallowed the word "please." Jingjiu looked at the sky and said, "Isn't it time to eat?" "Yes, you. What do you want to eat?" The young woman got up and nervously grabbed the front of her robe, saying, "I'll do it right away." Jingjiu said, "I don't want to eat. Don't worry about me." When the young woman got up, the child in her arms very naturally slipped to the ground. The child wobbled his way to Jingjiu and opened his arms, saying, "I want a hug." Everyone liked beautiful things, and children would not hide their thoughts. The atmosphere in the reception hall became even more tense. The adults wanted to pull the child back, but didn't dare, and the young woman's face became somewhat pale. Jingjiu looked at the child and said earnestly, "No." He didn't like children at all. It was because the efficiency of communication was too low and troublesome, unless the child was smart enough or had a maturity beyond his age. For instance, the young monk in the Guoqing temple and Liu Baojin in the small village. The child felt wronged, and he almost cried out with pursed lips. Seeing this scene, the family in the parlor heaved a sigh of relief and felt much more at ease. "Do you want some tea?" the young woman asked gingerly. "No need." Jingjiu realized that his curiosity had caused a great deal of pressure to this family, so he picked up the conical hat and walked toward the outside of the courtyard. He stopped at the gate of the courtyard and said, "Sorry for troubling you over the years." It was still raining, and nobody was in the alley. Jingjiu put on the conical hat and walked into the rain with his head lowered after wiping his face with his hand. It was dusk, and the spring rain was still drizzling. The pedestrians were in a hurry. Nobody noticed that Jingjiu wore a black mask on his face. To the east of Zhaoga City, the streets near the White Horse Lake were bustling, with many shops and shops. The famous restaurants and brothels had already hung up the lanterns in advance, reflecting the drizzling rain. It was a beautiful sight. Even though it was raining, the streets were still bustling, with pedestrians everywhere. All kinds of boots stepped on the puddles among the green stones, making paw sounds. There was a medical house to the west of the street. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to what was written on the signboard, but he knew this was the place when he saw the begonia flower carved on the signboard. Who would have thought that the most mysterious intelligence organization in Chaotian, the Curtain Rollers, was located in the most prosperous place in Zhaoga City? Nobody was sure who the owner of the Curtain Rollers was. Jingjiu had heard many secrets from his big brother back then, but he didn't mention this. However, according to what they had done in the past hundreds of years, the Curtain Rollers should be inclined to the orthodox side. Jingjiu looked around with his hands behind his back and found this medical house was quite ordinary, and it wasn't safe. However, no matter how mysterious the Curtain Rollers were, they still had to do business, so they needed a channel to communicate with the outside world. The medical house was indeed a suitable place. The conversation between the doctor and the patient had to be kept confidential and couldn't be overheard by others, and it was necessary in every city. The doctor in the medical house sensed something unusual. He lifted his head and glanced at Jingjiu, asking, "Are you here to see a doctor or to buy medicine?" "Neither," said Jingjiu. "I'm here to ask you something." The doctor asked with narrowed eyes, "What is it?" Jingjiu recalled what his big brother had said to him, making sure he was right. "Is the begonia still the same?" he asked. The doctor was taken aback. Jingjiu thought it was a bit unprofessional. After a long while, the doctor finally came back to his senses. He glanced at Jingjiu with a gloomy expression, saying, "It looks like you are seriously ill. Come in with me and have a look." "I'm not ill," said Jingjiu. The doctor glanced at Jingjiu again. "I'm sorry," Jingjiu said, finally understanding what the other party meant. When they came to the quiet inner room, the doctor said, "Tell me your question. I want to know the relationship between the master of Shilai Peak of the Aoyama sect and Taiping Jinren," said Jingjiu. Chapter 117. Jingjiu felt he had said something wrong, asking, "What's wrong?" "First time?" the doctor asked. "Yes," Jingjiu answered. "I've never asked about it before." The doctor thought someone's kid must have learned the secret of the curtain rollers from an elder, so he came here. The problem was that the Haitang is still the same, was a secret code from many years ago. Those who still used this secret code were those big sects or clans with a long history, which the curtain rollers didn't want to offend easily. He sighed and said, "No one will ask this question because this question is too big and involves too high a level." "How high?" Jingjiu asked. The master of Shilai Peak, Fong Jingtian, is an important figure in the Aoyama sect. He is in the state of broken sea, one step away from the heavenly arrival state. "How high do you think he is?" The doctor said helplessly, not to mention Taiping Jinren, who is at the highest level. Jingjiu said, "I heard you know everything." The doctor said solemnly, "But I'm not qualified enough to know all this. And even if I knew, you wouldn't be able to pay the price." Jingjiu asked, "How much?" The doctor thought, "Do you think I'm buying vegetables?" "A lot." The doctor glanced at his hands and the iron sword wrapped in cloth on his back, saying, "At least you don't have enough with you." Jingjiu reached out his hands, and 2 boxes appeared on the ground. The boxes were opened, and they were full of golden leaves. The room was filled with golden light. The doctor was slightly startled, saying, "It's still not enough. But if you're willing to take out this spatial magic tool, maybe we can negotiate." Jingjiu shook his head and said, "No, I want to use it to store things." The doctor said, "Then I'm sorry. Or you can exchange it with information." Jingjiu thought for a while and said, "The fake manor cave of the immortal Jingyang opened last night. Something happened." The doctor said, "I know Zen Master's Lotus sedan showed up." Jingjiu said, "Fong Jingtian was also there." The room became very quiet. After a moment of silence, the doctor picked up a pen and wrote a few lines on the paper. The words looked ordinary, but every word had a few extra strokes, so no one could understand them. "This information is indeed worth some money." The doctor looked up at Jingjiu and continued, "But it's far from enough." Jingjiu ignored his words and asked instead, Aren't the curtain rollers afraid of people seeking revenge by setting up their communication center here? It's too conspicuous. The doctor said these passages that remain in the world can be broken if you want to. As for us ordinary deacons, it doesn't matter if we die. But you're not an ordinary deacon. Jing Jiu said, you can be sure that Fong Jingtian's information is valuable without contacting the outside world. This means that you know all the information about the curtain rollers. The doctor put down the pen in his hand and looked at Jing Jiu with narrowed eyes. This young man, wearing a bamboo hat, walked into the clinic. He appeared to be inexperienced. Who would have thought that his eyesight was so sharp? Who on earth are you? What do you want? I need to know your position in the curtain rollers before I can talk. The doctor was silent for a while and pushed the golden chopper on the table to the end. Silently, the room was sealed off and a formation was activated. This array formation was very small and exquisite. It was certain that it could conceal all the auras in the room without letting the auras of the array formation spread to the streets. After doing this, the doctor looked at Jing Jiu again. He looked much more serious and said, please go ahead. Jing Jiu said, a few years ago, Zhao Liu asked you to investigate Bihu Peak. As a result, someone among you leaked the information and caused a lot of trouble. Of course, the doctor knew about it. This was the biggest humiliation of the curtain rollers in the past 10 years. He didn't expect that this young man wearing a bamboo hat would know about it, and it seemed that he came on behalf of Zhao Liu. Sorry, we are still investigating. It's been 3 years, and you still haven't found anything. Jing Jiu said, according to the rules I've heard, you should make compensation. The doctor said, please tell me what you want. Jing Jiu said, as I said, I want to investigate Fong Jingtian. The doctor sighed and said, he is a big shot of the Aoyama sect. How can we investigate him? I know you have people in the 9 peaks of Aoyama. Jing Jiu was very sure about this. That person should be the source of Zhao Liu's information. I need to ensure that person's safety, so I need to know who you are first. The doctor had guessed Jing Jiu's identity, but he couldn't confirm it. Jing Jiu didn't pay attention to it and said, besides, I want to investigate another person. The doctor asked who. Jing Jiu said, Shiwang Sunday. The doctor said, this is beyond the scope of compensation. Jing Jiu said, I will give you other information in exchange. The doctor said, that depends on whether your information is valuable or not. Was the former emperor faking his death and becoming a monk in the Guoqing temple? Was the background of Zen master? Why doesn't he want to show his true self? Jing Jiu asked, is this enough? The things he mentioned were undoubtedly the biggest secrets in Chaotian. Yet the doctor laughed out and said, these things have been circulating in the world for a long time, but they're nothing more than stories without proof, not worth a penny. What I said is all true, and it can be verified. Jing Jiu said, I can give you a piece of information in advance. Zen Master's secular name is Jin Shengsheng. His parents died when he was a child, and he was raised by a mountain demon. You can check the annals of Tsuaping County in Ruzhou 27 years ago. It is written clearly in the annals that a snowstorm occurred on the 17th day of the first month of the year, and the sunlight suddenly appeared on the eastern mountain, which means that the mountain demon failed to pass the heavenly tribulation. On the same day, the monk in the vegetable garden of the Guoqing temple found an abandoned baby behind the mountain, which is recorded in the annals of the Justice Hall. You should be able to see it with your ability. It was quiet. The doctor was so shocked that he couldn't speak for a while. According to what he had said, it was just a story without any proof. The problem was that Jing Jiu spoke calmly and provided enough evidence to prove it. We'll verify it as soon as possible. The doctor's expression was very serious and respectful. The curtain rollers respected those who knew more than they did. Jing Jiu got up and was about to leave. Wait a minute. The information you have given me is too important. I don't dare accept it unilaterally. The doctor said, I want to give you 3 pieces of information in return. Jing Jiu halted his steps. The first is that the 5 winners of this year's plum meeting will receive the blessing of Zen Master. The doctor continued, The second is that Tian Jingren will come to Zhaoga City soon to evaluate the disciples of various sects participating in the plum meeting. Who is Tian Jingren? Asked Jing Jiao. The doctor was startled, wondering why Jing Jiao didn't know who Tian Jingren was if he knew the real name of Zen Master. Tian Jingren had been blind since he was a child. He had studied in Yamatsai and then went overseas to seek the Tao. Though he couldn't cultivate, he was knowledgeable enough to found the Institute of White Deer. He was famous for his ability to perceive the secrets of heaven and earth even though he couldn't see things, and could predict one's life and death with one sentence. It was said that when the godly swordsman was still a nameless youth, he applied for the No Mercy sect but wasn't accepted. He was determined to commit suicide by the riverside, but was stopped by Tian Jingren, who happened to pass by, and gave him a poem. The godly swordsman went overseas resolutely, and his fate changed. He inherited the treasures in the manor cave of the previous immortal on an island, and became a figure in the heavenly arrival state. He founded the Western Sea Sword School and suppressed the No Mercy sect in recent years. The godly swordsman still respected Tian Jingren, and even asked him to help him establish the Hall of Heavenly Calculation in the Western Sea. It was said that even the two-world connection of Shui Yu Nunnery and the two-mind connection of Guoqing Temple were not as good as his secret method of heavenly insight. Countless nobles and cultivation geniuses were willing to pay any price to get a comment from him. Chapter 118. How could such a legendary experience be evaluated as being able to bluff others? The doctor thought Jing Jiao was truly good at bluffing others. He took out a booklet and handed it to Jing Jiao. Then he glanced at Jing Jiao meaningfully, saying, "This is the third piece of information. The booklet is worth 100 crystals. I think you need it." Jing Jiao took the booklet and said after some thought, "I'll give you a piece of information in return. Zhao Liu will participate in the plum meeting." The doctor's expression changed slightly, asking for confirmation. "Which one?" "The last one, of course," said Jing Jiao. The doctor said, "I'll inform you as soon as there is any progress regarding Fang Jingtian and Shuang Sunday." He didn't ask who Jing Jiao was, nor did he discuss with Jing Jiao how to inform each other. After Jing Jiao left, the assistant of the medical house came in and said while shaking his head, "We can't see his face, so we can't draw his portrait." "Didn't you use the all-light mirror?" asked the doctor. "Yes," said the assistant. "The conical hat is fine, but the black mask on his face is a bit weird." The doctor thought it must be a magic treasure made by Shuriwet Peak, so he said no more. Zhao Liu will participate in the cultivation tournament of the plum meeting. The assistant took a pen and paper, writing it down as quickly as he could. In many people's eyes, even though Zhao Liu had natural Tao quality, she had only practiced cultivation for a short period of time, so she couldn't be a match for Lo Huainan, Tong Yin, and the others. Moreover, she was now the master of Shenma Peak, so she wouldn't participate in the plum meeting easily. As such, she would only be a spectator at the plum meeting, but unexpectedly she would participate in the plum meeting. The ranking on the booklet will be changed soon. The doctor said sentimentally, "There are problems between Shenma Peak and Shilai Peak and Bihu Peak. Since when has Aoyama been so chaotic? Send a message to all the departments to continue the investigation. All the information will be classified into the third class." The assistant agreed and continued writing on the paper. "The origin of Zen Master will be classified into the first class, top secret." The doctor glanced at the assistant and handed him a new piece of paper. The waiter understood what he meant and nodded repeatedly. The doctor thought for a moment and said, "If this information is confirmed, give him the information we have on Shiwang's Sunday," the shop assistant said. "Shiwang's son is too cautious. He didn't even hire anyone from the Western Sea Sword School, and his personal attendants are all very mysterious. We don't have much information on them." The doctor said, "I only promised to exchange information with him. I didn't say that we had a lot of information." The attendant felt some sympathy for the young man in the bamboo hat who had just left and asked, "Just who was that person?" The doctor said, Yesterday's Zen master told the Duke of He that the person protected by the auspicious cloud the night before was the descendant of an old friend. The key lies in 2 points. Who is the descendant of the old friend? Why do they need Zen master's help? Today, this person said that the leader of Shilai Peak was also present at the scene and wanted to investigate. Can't he tell who he is? The shop assistant was a little surprised and said, "Is he Jingjio?" The doctor took a sip from the teacup and said, "That's right. Besides the personal disciple of the immortal Jingyang, who else would know such an old secret code?" The shop assistant seemed to have realized something, saying, "That's why you gave him those 3 pieces of information. Since he's going to participate in the plum meeting, he must like those 3 pieces of information, especially the last one." The doctor couldn't help but shake his head when he thought of something. It was obvious that Jingjio didn't know much about the affairs of the world. He wore a mask to conceal his identity, but it was full of loopholes. Such a young man, even if he was a special talent in the sword work, wouldn't be able to go far. It was unknown whether it was worthwhile for the curtain rollers to befriend him. The night rain was soundless, but not annoying. Jingjio went back to his room in the small courtyard and lay on the bamboo chair. He took out the booklet and browsed through it casually. His expression was very calm. If it were any other young cultivation practitioner participating in the plum meeting, even someone like Tong Yin, he would have a grave expression on his face. This seemingly ordinary booklet recorded all the information about the top 100 candidates participating in this year's plum meeting. It didn't contain simple information like their cultivation sex, birthplaces, ages, and genders, but the cultivation methods, the magic treasures and flying swords they were good at, the analysis of their fighting awareness, the evaluation of their cultivation states, and the prediction of their final ranking. As for how the top 100 candidates were determined, it came from a judgment of the curtain rollers. Since the booklet was related to the cultivation methods and fighting, it referred to the last event of zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. The cultivation tournament. Jingjio wasn't very interested in it, so he skimmed through it casually. The top candidate was Lo Huainan. This leading figure of the young generation of disciples of Zhongzhou School had reached the middle state of the Golden Pill 6 years ago, and it was unclear which state she had broken through by now. If he hadn't broken Gua Nanshan's Blue Ocean Sword, he might have been able to contend with Gua Nanshan by virtue of his state of free travel, but it was impossible for anyone to challenge him now. It was reasonable that the curtain rollers thought highly of him. To his surprise, the second candidate was not Tong Yin by Zhao or a disciple of Shui Yu Nunnery, but a disciple of the Western Sea Sword School named Tong Lu. Jingjio didn't pay much attention to it. He kept turning the pages and finally saw the name of a disciple of Aoyama in the 17th place, Yao Songzhan. Then he saw his own name in the 40th place. In many people's eyes, Jingjio's victory over Gu Han was an accident, and it didn't mean that his prowess was superior to Gu Han's. Not everyone had been immersed in the sword work for many years like the masters of the 9 peaks of Aoyama, so they could tell that he was extraordinary. Even the masters of Aoyama thought that if Gu Han hadn't been too confident and used the locking autumn by cold well to attack him, Jingjio wouldn't have been able to defeat him even if he was born with the sword body. The gap between the initial state of the undefeated and the upper state of the undefeated was too large. This was a reasonable deduction, and Jingjio didn't care. He was just thinking that the curtain rollers would definitely make changes to the booklet if they knew that Zhao Liu would participate in the cultivation tournament. He wondered what the girl's ranking would be. Suddenly, he was interested in the ranking of the chess tournament. Of course, he didn't think it meant that his ranking in the tournament was too low. When he turned to the section of the chess tournament, the first name he saw was Tong Yin. Her evaluation was just like the rumors, with all kinds of praises. His name appeared after a dozen places, and the evaluation was very simple. First in the chess tournament of the Four Seas banquet, amazing calculation ability, but obviously a beginner. Even if he had made great progress in the past year, it was impossible for him to peek into the great path of the world. In the early morning, Jingjio woke up. He washed his face with the sword fire, tidied up his clothes, and walked out of his room to the flower hall. The family was having breakfast, which was simple porridge and steamed buns, with a big bowl of vegetable wonton in the middle that looked more delicious. The young woman stood up to greet Jingjio, asking carefully, "Would you like to have some with us?" "No need," said Jingjio. "A guest will come to see me later. I just wanted to let you know. Don't be nervous." This family had lived here for a long time, so their relatives and friends often came to visit them. However, thinking that the guest was Jingjio, they couldn't help but feel nervous. Both the aged grandfather and the middle-aged couple showed anxious expressions on their faces, wondering what they should do later. Only the child couldn't feel the atmosphere at home. He stared at Jingjio, his eyes rolling around curiously, wondering if this was his young uncle. "You don't need to entertain that guest. Just do whatever you want." Having said that, Jingjio was about to go back. But he thought of something and asked, "Will there be any gambling at the plum meeting?" A young man sat by the table, who should be Jingjio's elder brother in name. He hadn't spoken a word in the last 2 days. Hearing Jingjio's question, the young man explained hastily, knowing that his parents and wife didn't know about these things. The regular folks in Zhaoga City have no access to such a grand cultivation event like the plum meeting. Even if those princes and chancellors held gambling games, they were worried that the immortal masters would be displeased. As such, the imperial court has forbidden it. But it's only in the open. There's still some gambling games in private. Jingjio said, "If there's a reliable gambling game, you guys can give it a try." The young man was startled, asking, "What are we betting on?" Chapter 119. According to the booklet of the curtain rollers, Jingjio was ranked 17th in the chess tournament, and Tong Yin was ranked 1st. It was believed that the odds of those private bets were about the same. If Jingjio could win first place in the chess tournament, and he could do it, he would be able to earn a lot of money. Though he could give this family a box of golden leaves, it was not as good as doing it this way. It was reasonable for the Jing family to bet on their own son. It depended on whether this family would believe his claim and bet a large amount of money on his winning, or in other words, foolishly. Chaotian was very vast, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth was concentrated in the middle of the land, which looked like a green phoenix. The center state, where Zhaoga City was located, was the head of the green phoenix. The amount and density of the spiritual energy there was unparalleled. The wings of the green phoenix covered the area of Aoyama, where the density of the spiritual energy was lower, but purer. Until now, the cultivation circle still couldn't tell which of the two places was more suitable for cultivation. However, the density of the spiritual energy was more important for the fetuses who breathed the energy of heaven and earth in their mother's wombs. For this reason, the center state had always been full of talents, which led to the Zhongzhou school becoming the #1 sect. The Aoyama sect was located in the southern land, so they wouldn't miss the opportunity to recruit disciples around Zhaoga City. Among the dozens of disciples of Aoyama who came to participate in the plum meeting and the ceremony, there were a few from Zhaoga City. Zhao Leiyu was a typical successful case, and also the biggest regret of the Zhongzhou school in recent years. After coming to Zhaoga City, Zhao Leiyu didn't have to live in the immortal house. After receiving the letter, she informed her family and put on the conical hat. She came to an alley not far from Taichung Temple in the fine rain after passing through it. The wooden door opened with a faint sound, and the eldest daughter-in-law of the Jing family welcomed her warmly. Standing in the middle of the courtyard, Zhao Leiyu looked around, feeling something wrong with the atmosphere. This was indeed the home of the Jing family, but it was unlikely that such a family could raise someone like Jingjio. However, when the cultivation practitioners returned to their homes in the mortal world, they would feel uncomfortable, and the uncomfortable feeling wouldn't disappear until their relatives in the mortal world grew old and disappeared. At that moment, the cultivation practitioners could be considered to have embarked on their own path. Zhao Leiyu didn't think too much about it, thinking that her feeling came from the classic question of the cultivation circle. Soon, she got a completely different answer from Jingjio. "They're not my real family. My identity and background are all fake." Jingjio didn't intend to hide it from her, when he invited her here. And then? Asked Zhao Liu, startled. Asked Zhao Zhao and, looking at her messy hair, it was obvious that no one had taken care of it. Where are the maids? He asked. I'm not used to being. Zhao Liu rubbed her head carelessly, making her hair even messier. Shaking his head, Jing Jiao took out the wooden comb and handed it over. Zhao Liu took the comb and combed it twice, her black hair instantly becoming soft and smooth. This comb is really useful, she said. I want to see the curtain rollers last night, said Zhao Liu, her eyes sharpening. The expression in Zhao Liu's eyes grew sharp, asking, and, no, I just wanted to tell you, said Jing Jiao. When will you tell me your real identity? Asked Zhao Liu. In the future, said Jing Jiao. Why have you been avoiding Nan Wang? Asked Zhao Liu. Nan Wang was the real name of the peak master of Qingrong. In the future, said Jing Jiao after a moment of silence. Never and in the future were the two most frequently used words in this conversation. Zhao Liu was a bit annoyed, asking, why did you call me here then? I want to tell you another secret. Jing Jiao continued. This small courtyard was arranged by Duke Liu. You can contact him here. After a moment of silence, Zhao Liu asked, is this the arrangement of Senior Grandmaster Jingyang before his ascension? Hearing the name Jingyang, Jing Jiao could keep his composure, saying he was worried that something might go wrong, so he had some backup plans, including this courtyard, and you and me. After another moment of silence, Zhao Liu said, I don't understand why Senior Grandmaster insisted on ascending if he had sensed something was wrong in advance. Jing Jiao said after a moment of silence, the temptation of ascension might be too hard to bear. Duke Liu is very popular in the imperial court. Can he be trusted? Asked Zhao Liu. Jing Jiao took out the wooden board and handed it to her, saying, yes. If something happens to you or your family in Zhaoga City, you can come here to find him with this wooden board. The mechanism is on the green stone by the door. I made a hidden mark of the Shema Peak. You can find it by using your piercing discernment. Zhao Liu said, you have given me the thoughtless sword and the wooden board. What else do you have? I'm too lazy to deal with these things, said Jing Jiao, so I'll let you take the lead. Like climbing the Shema Peak? Asked Zhao Liu. Yes, said Jing Jiao. Zhao Liu took the wooden board after some thought, saying, okay, if I can't walk anymore, remember to take me with you. For sure, said Jing Jiao. The Shui Nunnery sent a mysterious female disciple named Guodong to this plum meeting. Nobody has ever seen her before. It's said that she is the personal disciple of Lien Sanyue. Zhao Liu said all of a sudden. Jing Jiao didn't understand why she seemed to care about this matter so much, as she had never cared about this kind of thing. I heard that the relationship between Senior Grandmaster and Lien Sanyue was problematic. How many times did they fight? She stared into Jing Jiao's eyes as she said this. Jing Jiao said after some thought, the relationship between the two of them is indeed problematic, and they did fight. Zhao Liu said, if so, as the personal disciple of Senior Grandmaster, how can I lose to the personal disciple of Lien Sanyue? Noticing the eagerness in her eyes, Jing Jiao realized that she was serious, feeling a bit helpless. The women of Shui Nunnery are always beautiful, and they're even more famous than those of Qingrong Peak. Zhao Liu suddenly felt that her hair was a bit short, and her eyebrows were a bit thick. She walked to the front of the mirror and looked at herself for a while. Do I look better this way? She asked while covering her thick eyebrows with both of her forefingers. Jing Jiao walked behind her and rubbed her hair, saying with a smile, you look so adorable. Zhao Liu was a bit annoyed, but she didn't say anything. Jing Jiao continued, there's no need to compare. You don't know how to play zither anyway. The plum meeting would begin the next day. The zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting were the first event. The disciples of Shui Nunnery were the best at playing the zither. It was the immortal master Mo who won first place in the zither at the Four Seas banquet. The personal disciple of Lien Sanyue must be better at playing the zither. Staring at Jing Jiao in the mirror, Zhao Liu remarked, do you have a death wish? The security in Xiaoga City had always been excellent. Countless magic guards and swordsmen of the imperial court were stationed here, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth gathered here was enough to kill a swordsman in the state of Broken Sea. As a result, the cultivation practitioners of various sects didn't dare make trouble here, to say nothing of those thieves and robbers. According to the previous rules, the cultivation practitioners were forbidden to fly into the city unless the imperial court issued a special decree. However, the ban was temporarily lifted because of the plum meeting. The populace in the city could see the sword lights or the magic treasures flashing in the blue sky from time to time, causing a great deal of cheers and discussions. Of course, many scholars in the streets and alleys were waving their arms excitedly, telling the populace that the unusual phenomenon in the sky was merely a trick played by the imperial court, that there were no cultivation practitioners in the world, and that there were no snow-eating monsters in the north. The purpose of all this was to provide more money for the Pure Heaven Bureau and the Northern Army, and the money was in the hands of the officials. For instance, the large amount of money spent on this year's plum meeting actually went to the royal concubine who in the imperial palace. She gave the money to a monk. If you don't believe me, why didn't I see a fairy swordsman flying over here and beheading himself with a white light? It was because this was Xiaoga City, where the cultivation practitioners wouldn't kill people randomly, and no cultivation practitioner was willing to pay attention to these crazy scholars. The imperial court was busy as well, and the Pure Heaven Bureau was even busier. There were more than 1,000 representatives of various sects participating in the plum meeting, and the registration, accommodation, and arrangements were piling up like a mountain. Moreover, the plum meeting officially began today, and the officials had all gone to the plum garden. The officials had many things to report to others, so they were running around like headless flies. The flying carriages rose and landed from time to time, and the self-propelled wooden chairs developed by Lumen were running amok in the courtyards of the government offices. Chapter 120. The whole of the Pure Heaven Bureau was busy, but Shi Fengshan, a high-ranking official, the vice inspector, was so leisurely. It could only mean one thing. He had been sidelined. He started investigating the case in Chaonan City 3 years ago, and it wasn't until last year that he found the real culprit. Unfortunately, he found the culprit was the Aoyama sect. After he returned to Xiaoga City, he was scolded and reprimanded by his superior, almost losing his official position. It wasn't until the royal concubine in the imperial palace intervened that he was safe. Last year, he went to the imperial palace to express his gratitude to the royal concubine, but he didn't have a connection with the royal concubine. As a result, he lost his value in the eyes of many people, so he was ostracized and lost his official position. Until now, he still didn't understand why the chief commander was so angry, even though he had offended the Aoyama sect. As far as he knew, Chief Commander Wei was a free-traveling practitioner who didn't have much relationship with the cultivation sects in the southern land. It was Duke Liu who recommended him all the way to his current position. It was better not to think about these issues. The tea in the teacup tasted good. Leisurely life had its advantages. At least he wouldn't have to make the best spring tea into a soup just because he didn't have time to drink tea, and he wouldn't have to make the tea in the teacup into a clear soup just because he didn't have time to change the tea. Thinking of this, Shi Fengshan squinted at the plum garden in the distance. The plum garden was located in the west of the imperial city, where the plum meeting was held. Many years ago, the monsters of the snowy kingdom invaded, and the imperial court lost its legitimacy. The human race was in a critical situation. The only descendant of the imperial family and a few young leaders of the orthodox cultivation sects made a blood oath in the plum garden. They worked together to quell the rebellion of the refugees and then defeated the army of the monsters of the snowy kingdom, restoring the human race to its former glory. To commemorate this historic alliance, the imperial court would hold a plum meeting every few years, inviting the orthodox cultivation sects and many other cultivation sects to participate. In addition, The current plum meeting was more important because the alliance of the orthodox cultivation sects would decide the amount of crystals and resources each sect would get in the following years, according to their ranking at the plum meeting. For the giants like Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect, the increase or decrease of resources was not important, but who would be willing to lose face? Many years ago, the plum garden was just a plum garden. Shi Fengchun had once visited the ruins. It was only a few acres in size, with dozens of plum trees growing sparsely. It was very common. However, the appearance of the plum garden had changed a long time ago. It could be said that it was one of the most magnificent buildings in Chaotian. Even a nearby royal palace was inferior to it. Today, the plum garden was made up of dozens of high platforms, connected by a straight stone path. Plum blossoms were planted everywhere, both on the sides of the path and on the platforms. If one looked at it from afar, the building itself looked like a huge plum tree, but it was covered by the clouds and mist summoned by the formation, so ordinary people couldn't see it at all. Now the most favored concubine in the palace was Concubine Mei. It was said that she was about to threaten the status of Concubine Hu. Thinking of a day when he entered the palace to meet the royal concubine Hu, Shi Fengchun narrowed his eyes even more, almost forming a straight line, and the mocking smile on the corners of his mouth became even more obvious. But this time, it was a self-mockery. At the time, he thought the clue found in the pile of old papers was the weakness of the royal concubine Hu, so he planned to take the opportunity to threaten her to do something for him. Unexpectedly, the emperor had already known about it. If Shi Fengchun hadn't been good at observing people's facial expressions and reacted quickly enough to change the topic, he would have been dead by now. The path wasn't working. Shi Fengchun thought to himself sentimentally that the emperor had chosen a vixen as the royal concubine. It was a sign that the world would be in chaos. Like the young peak master of the Aoyama sect, would those evils from many years ago come out to wreak havoc in the human world? Yet, he was merely a regular official of the Pure Heaven Bureau who had been marginalized. What could he do for the people of the world? He couldn't count on the royal concubine Hu, and she was even problematic. The imperial court couldn't punish her, and the law and discipline couldn't punish her, so he had to kill her by himself. Kill you? I'll definitely kill you. Shi Fengchun murmured while looking at the distant sky, looking like a madman. In the late spring in Jiaoga City, the sky was blue and cloudless, and dozens of sword marks could be seen clearly. The major sects like the Zhongzhou school and the Aoyama sect had to try their best to participate in the plum meeting. As for the small sects like the Three-Du sect and the Haoyan sect, being able to participate in the plum meeting was already enough, so they didn't want to do anything else. All they wanted was to see some legendary figures, so they could brag about them to their colleagues when they returned to the mountains. The high platform, enshrouded in clouds and fog, was full of plum blossoms, looking like a real fairy realm. The masters and disciples of the small sects stood on it, feeling a bit nervous, but also excited. Some disciples asked curiously why there were so many plum blossoms in the late spring, which was met with mockery from their colleagues in a low voice. This was the plum garden, where all kinds of plum trees in the world grew. The plum blossoms would bloom in spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Moreover, the Great Formation was involved in the mysteries of heaven and earth. Even if it wasn't the right time, the blooming of tens of thousands of flowers could still be controlled by the emperor's will. The highest cold platform in the north is the Zhongzhou school. Which sect is on the highest platform in the west? The Guocheng Temple? The Guocheng Temple usually doesn't hold any events, and they seldom participate in the plum meeting. Why would they sit there? Idiot, the host of this year's plum meeting is Zen Master, so it's impossible for the Guocheng Temple not to send someone here. On the stone platforms close to the ground, the disciples of various sects were talking about it. Thinking that they were so close to those rumored figures, they couldn't help but feel excited. The current plum garden was made up of dozens of high platforms, looking like a plum tree from a distance. Those high platforms looked like the leaves or plum blossoms hidden in the clouds and fog all year round, so they were called cold platforms. The name was derived from the meaning of the solitary plum blossoms growing alone in the cold. Since the plum meeting, the positions of most of the sect have been fixed, with few changes, especially the dozen cold platforms at the highest point. The Zhongzhou school was located on the highest cold platform in the north. It was said that Lo Huainan and Tong Yin didn't come today, which disappointed many people. Below the platform was the position of Yamatai. Without a teacher to guide them, the 10 scholars sat on the futons in silence, either looking at the plum blossoms to inquire about their hearts, or looking at the sky to inquire about their Tao. They were completely different from those poor scholars on the streets of Zhaoga City. The highest cold platform in the west was the position of the Guoqing Temple. The other two cold platforms with similar heights were the ones of Shui Yu Nunnery and the Western Sea Sword School. The female disciples of Shui Yu Nunnery all wore white veils on their faces, which were fluttering in the wind, looking very similar. It was hard to tell who was the personal disciple of that mysterious Lien Sanwei. The relationship between the Western Sea Sword School and Zhaoga City was quite ordinary, so only a few people came to the plum garden. The upright young disciple, standing in the front, attracted many gazes. He was Tong Lu, who had become more and more famous in recent years. The cold platforms in the south belonged to the Ozawa sect, the Platonist sect, and the No Mercy sect, which had been suppressed by the Western Sea Sword School in recent years. The cold platform at the highest point faced the cold platform of the Zhongzhou school in the distance. They were both located at the highest point of the plum garden, but they were still empty. It was the position of the Aoyama sect. The positions of the cold platforms in the plum garden were the approximate distribution of the orthodox sections. The Jing dynasty had been on the rise for many years, but the situation hadn't changed much. The Aoyama sect and the Zhongzhou school were still the undisputed leaders. Though the young generation of the Aoyama sect had been suppressed by the Zhongzhou school in the last few decades, the cultivation practitioners had a long lifespan, and the path toward heaven was full of dangers. Nobody could predict how the situation would change in the future. For instance, the Aoyama sect had produced a few outstanding disciples in the last few years, like Guan Nanshan and Ru Zhui, and of course, Xiao Leiyu. Moreover, the Aoyama sect had 10 swordsmen in the Broken Sea state and 2 in the Heavenly Arrival state. Who in Chao Tian dared to challenge such a powerful force? The year before last, Yuan Qijing, the master of Shanghai Peak, had finally entered the Heavenly Arrival state and became another important figure in Chaotian. The guests of various sects gathered in Aoyama at the moment. They all felt a chill in the air while congratulating Yuan Qijing. If it weren't widely known that the sect master of Aoyama and Yuan Qijing were not on good terms with each other, the other cultivation sects would feel even more uneasy. The Aoyama sect is here. A surprise cry suddenly broke out in the field. Dozens of sword lights illuminated the sky, and then abruptly converged above the plum garden. Dozens of figures appeared on the highest cold platform in the south. Apart from the peak master of Qingrong, Nan Wang, the rest of them wore green sword robes, looking heroic. The discussions broke out on the dozens of cold platforms, even on the cold platforms of the Kunlun sect and Ozawa sect. Who is Zhao Leiyu? I don't see a girl with messy hair. Who is Jingjiu? Is he really that good-looking? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.